Chapter 1818. In the inner world, Lu Yi watched as Su Yuqing and Chen Xianhai slowly came back to their senses, and the terrifying soul force fluctuations also slowly subsided. Chen Xianhai turned to look in Lu Ye's direction with a slightly complicated expression, and said, "Junior sister, I'll leave it to you." Su Yuqing nodded. Only then did Chen Xianhai fly out of the outer world. Lu Yi glanced in the direction he left, and walked towards Su Yuqing. After standing in front of her, he asked, "What's wrong?" The way Chen Xianhai looked at him just now seemed a little strange. Su Yuqing pondered for a moment, and then stretched out her hand to Lu Yi, and said softly, "Come." Lu Yi placed his hand on her palm, and in the next instant, pure magic power wrapped around him, and the two of them flew towards the nearest spiritual peak. After a while, Su Yuqing took out 2 chairs on that spiritual peak and sat opposite Lu Yi. Lu Yi felt that she should have something very important to tell him, otherwise there was no need to be so serious. However, Su Yuqing had not mentioned it yet, and he did not want to urge her, so he waited quietly. After a long while, Su Yuqing said, "How much do you know about the Dao tree lineage?" Lu Yi shook his head. "I know nothing at all." He had heard this title from Feng Lao, but at that time, Feng Lao did not say too much, and asked in return, "You know?" Previously, when he mentioned the Dao tree lineage, Su Yuqing clearly had a different reaction, clearly having heard of this lineage. "I've heard of it. In fact, there are records of the Dao tree lineage in Rest Abyss Pavilion." Su Yuqing nodded. Lu Yi was surprised. "Why didn't I see it?" When he first entered Heart Mountain, he had stayed in Rest Abyss Pavilion for several months, imprinting a large amount of information about the starry sky, and bringing it back to the 9 provinces, filling in the gaps in the 9 provinces' knowledge of the starry sky. Su Yuqing said, "There are some secrets in Rest Abyss Pavilion that are not open to outsiders." Lu Yi understood, and was wondering why he had not seen any records of this. "Tell me about it." Lu Yi sat up straight. He was actually very interested in his inheritance, and back then, he had asked Little Nine about it. Unfortunately, Little Nine could not give him any answer, only telling him that Lu Yi was not the first person to obtain this inheritance, and that before Lu Yi, several cultivators of the 9 provinces had obtained it, but they had not been able to grow. Su Yuqing's voice sounded, "What I know are all things recorded by the ancestors of my clan. I have never seen it with my own eyes, so you can just listen to it. Some things need your own judgment." Lu Yi nodded. The Dao tree is a legacy, and a very powerful one at that. There is only one person in each generation, and its specific form should be as you described before. When you look inside, there is a tree in your body. The last time the successor of the Dao tree appeared, it was 10,000 years ago. At that time, there was an extremely famous top domain, which was also the domain of the human race. It was even better than the current Yellow Dragon domain, and could be said to be the domain of the human race. Unfortunately, it was a top-grade realm like this that was destroyed in the end, because of the Dao tree lineage. "Why?" Lu Yi frowned. He did not have a deep understanding of how strong the Yellow Dragon domain was, but after living in the 10,000 forms sea for so many years, he had heard of the Yellow Dragon domain's great name many times. Now, on the 10,000 forms sea, the Yellow Dragon domain monopolized a top spiritual island. 10,000 years ago, the human race's domain was even stronger than the Yellow Dragon domain. But such a domain was destroyed because of the Dao tree lineage. Lu Yi was somewhat puzzled, and did not know what kind of cause and effect was involved. Su Yuqing said, "The Dao tree's successor of that generation was a cultivator of that top domain. He rose from nothing and became famous in the starry sky. The speed of his growth was extremely terrifying, but he did some things that angered the heavens and angered many forces. Not only was his reputation ruined, even the domain he came from was implicated." When she spoke up to hear, she glanced faintly at Lu Yi. "There's nothing in the world that the Dao tree can't refine. Your cultivation speed is so swift, and it's probably related to your own inheritance. I presume you're aware of how much assistance this inheritance provided to you during your growth." Lu Yi nodded seriously. Without the talent tree, he would never have been able to achieve what he did today. In the process of your growth, Have you ever used the power of the Tao tree to refine living beings? When she asked this question, Su Yuqing's expression was extremely serious. Lu Yi decisively shook his head. Never. Are you sure? I'm sure. Lu Yi nodded. In fact, Lu Yi had discovered this long ago, after the first change of the talent tree. Since he could activate the power of the talent tree to refine spirit stones, then he could completely refine the spiritual power in the bodies of cultivators for his own use, and even refine their qi and blood. If he really did so, then every cultivator would be a cultivation resource that he could refine. But Lu Yi did not do so, because he felt that doing so was no different from eating people, and it was somewhat difficult for him to accept. So until now, no matter how many enemies he had killed, even if some of them were not of the human race, he had never refined them. That's good. Su Yuqing let out a long breath, completely letting go of the worry in her heart. She was really afraid that Lu Yi had done something similar. Is there some hidden danger in doing this? Seeing the change in her expression, Lu Yi vaguely guessed. Su Yuqing nodded. There is a hidden danger, and a very big hidden danger. The Tao tree lineage can refine all things, but there is one thing that can't be refined, or rather, it can't be completely refined. What? Lu Yi was extremely surprised. Up until now, he had never encountered anything that he could not refine. As long as it was something that could help him grow, it seemed that he could refine it. The 7 emotions and 6 desires. Su Yuqing's red lips parted slightly. Or rather, the emotions of living beings with flesh and blood. 10,000 years ago, the successor of the Tao tree lineage did not have outstanding aptitude, and could even be said to be very poor. But he quickly discovered a way to quickly improve his aptitude, and that was to kill enemies and refine them. This kind of refinement seemed to not only allow his strength to grow, but also his aptitude. It was as if the Tao tree could deprive others of their aptitude to strengthen itself. Relying on this method, his strength grew stronger and stronger, and his aptitude became more and more outstanding. But the more living beings he refined, the more evil his nature became. Every enemy he killed was filled with all kinds of negative emotions before they died. And these emotions could not be completely refined by the Tao tree, so they could only accumulate in his body. Later on, in order to better improve his strength and aptitude, he secretly murdered many cultivators from powerful forces, including the successors of some of the top domains. Because these people were all extremely talented, they were of great help to his growth. He walked further and further down this evil path, causing more and more deaths. In the end, he lost himself, and brought disaster to the domain he came from. After this matter was exposed, countless powerful forces joined forces to besiege that domain. Countless Sunshine Realm experts participated in the battle, and the people of that domain were plunged into misery and suffering. If the experts of that domain had not been prepared, and created a mysterious treasure to move the domain away, I'm afraid that the entire domain would have been destroyed in that battle. Lu Yi originally thought that he was only listening to a story that happened 10,000 years ago. The fate of his ancestor made his heart tremble, and he was secretly on guard. But when he heard this, he suddenly felt a strong sense of familiarity. An expert of a certain realm had long been prepared. He had created a mysterious treasure, and moved the entire realm away at the critical moment. He hurriedly asked, what was the name of the successor of the Tao tree 10,000 years ago? Which domain did he come from? Su Yuqing thought for a moment and said, that person was called Chao Nian, and the domain he came from was called the 9 States. At this point, she raised her hand and grabbed Lu Ye's hand, looking at him seriously. Lu Yi, you must learn from Chao Nian's mistakes. With the Tao tree, you have faster growth than anyone else. You must not be greedy and refine living creatures. This will only harm you, and not do you any good. Of course, Lu Yi would not do such a thing. If he wanted to, he would have done it long ago. Moreover, to him, cultivation was very simple. As long as the talent tree had enough fuel reserves, he could just drill into the Wanxiang Sea. Why would he refine living creatures? Since he did not embark on this evil path in his early years, he would not do it in the future. I understand. Lu Yi nodded and looked at Su Yuqing. Yuqing, I have something to tell you. Go ahead. Su Yuqing looked at him seriously. Lu Yi gave her a thumbs up. The domain I came from outside is the 9 states. Su Yuqing blinked her big eyes. Isn't it the 9 heavens? She still remembered that Lu Yi used to call himself Lu Yi of the 9 heavens. The 9 heavens is just a name to outsiders. A senior once instructed us that when we go out, we must never mention the words 9 states. Therefore, the cultivators of this domain have always called themselves the 9 heavens to outsiders. This matter was destined to be unable to be hidden from the Xiaoman tribe, because in the future once Mount Fangsuan merged, they would know the truth about the 9 states sooner or later. And in front of Su Yuqing, Lu Yi had even less of an intention to hide it. Su Yuqing was stunned, then immediately reacted. Your 9 states and Chao Nian's 9 states, Lu Yi nodded. If nothing unexpected happens, it's the same 9 states. When he first met Little Nine used a method to let him see the scene of the previous 9 prefectures being besieged. At that time, he didn't know what the previous 9 prefectures had done to provoke so many strong enemies to besiege them. Unfortunately, Little Nine couldn't explain this matter to him, because when the previous 9 prefectures was besieged, Little Nine's intelligence had not yet been born. The reason why it could let Lu Yi see that scene was mainly because that shocking battle had left a deep impression on the origin of the 9 states. Little Nine was the combination of the tool spirit of the Tianji disc and the origin of the 9 states. Naturally, it reappeared with the origin of the 9 states. Only now did he know that the origin of the calamity of the former 9 states was actually Chao Nian. It was Chao Nian who had taken the evil path and offended too many powerful forces, so everyone joined forces to attack the former 9 states. Every morning, he had to spend a long time fighting against his cough. This time, he did not know how long it would take for him to completely recover. Happy National Day. While you're at it, ask for a monthly ticket. It seems to be double. End of this chapter. Chapter 1819. The former 9 states where Chao Nian was from was a top-level domain. Unfortunately, a single shift had exhausted almost all of the domain's resources, causing the 9 states to weaken. It was only a few years ago that it was barely promoted to a large domain. Now everything was developing in a good direction. The cultivators of the 9 states had left the starry sky and connected with the 10,000 elephant sea. The 9 states itself had the flower domain attached to it. The two complemented each other. Coupled with the special existence of Little Nine, the 9 states had leaped into a large domain that could rapidly grow. This was an advantage that no other domain in the starry sky could reach. It could be said that the future of the 9 states was worth looking forward to. In front of Lu Yi, Su Yuqing suddenly understood. So 10,000 years ago, although Chao Nian died, the inheritance of the Dao tree was still left in the 9 states. That should be the case. Lu Yi nodded. This inheritance might have had other owners before Chao Nian, and after Chao Nian, it might have had several owners until Lu Yi obtained it a few years ago. I see, Su Yuqing murmured. Lu Yi looked at her. What did you think of? Su Yuqing said. Actually, when I saw these records about the 9 states and Chao Nian, I was puzzled about one thing. The 9 states was the top-level domain occupied by the human race. Even if Chao Nian had done many evil things, the various factions only needed to kill Chao Nian to take revenge. Why did they gang up to attack the 9 states? Now that I think about it, Chao Nian was probably just a trigger. The inheritance of the Dao tree was their true goal. They must have known at the time that the inheritance of the Dao tree was still in the 9 states. Ordinary grievances were not enough for those factions to target the 9 states, but if there were enough benefits, it would be different. The temptation of the inheritance of the Dao tree was too great, and Chao Nian's actions gave them enough reasons and excuses. Thus, a great show of many factions joining forces to besiege the 9 states began. If the experts of the previous 9 states era had not been prepared, expending enormous energy and wealth to create the Plate of Heavenly Secrets, and using the power of the Plate of Heavenly Secrets to shift the 9 states away, the entire 9 states would have been dug up after that battle. Lu Yi, Su Yuqing said in a serious voice, the senior you mentioned was right. When you go out, you must not mention the 9 states. 10,000 years is a long time, but for those great factions it is not that long. The name of the 9 states and the inheritance of the Dao tree can lead to disaster. Lu Yi nodded. As for the little human tribe, only Rizhao and I know about this. The news will not be leaked, so you can rest assured. Right now Lu Yi was the master of the core source. In the future, he was destined to become the master of Mount Fengxuan. It could be said that he was already bound together with Mount Fengxuan. It was a relationship where if one of them suffered, the other would suffer. If one of them rose or fell, they would rise or fall together. The sunshine of the Minimin tribe naturally wouldn't do anything that was disadvantageous to him. Lu Yi was not worried about this. But then again, after chatting with Su Yuqing today, she learned some secrets that were closely related to her. Suddenly he thought of something. Oh right, how long would it take for the 3 Fengxuan mountains to merge together? Su Yuqing did some calculations and replied, our eastern region is the closest to here. It will probably take less than 3 years. The southern region will take more than 10 years. The western region is the furthest. I'm afraid it will take at least 30 to 40 years. Then I have to hurry. Lu Yi was deep in thought. There was plenty of time for the south and west to integrate, but the east only needed less than 3 years, which was very urgent. What's wrong? Su Yuqing was confused. Lu Yi explained. Although I've already refined the core source, and also refined the blood ancestors' precious blood's consciousness, that drop of precious blood's corrosion of the core world is omnipresent. Now there are still remnants of the precious blood's power in the entire core world. I have to carefully sort it out, and completely purify the remaining power of the precious blood. Only then will the Minimin tribe have nothing to worry about after Mount Fengxuan is integrated. Is 3 years enough time? Su Yuqing's expression tensed up. She clearly also realized that if the remaining power of the precious blood was not completely sorted out, it would lead to terrible consequences. It's about time. It doesn't matter if it's not enough. When the time comes, I'll seal the core, and the eastern region won't be able to integrate. He had already sealed the core before, so it wouldn't be difficult for him to do it again. Then I'll have to trouble you. Su Yuqing nodded. Lu Yi looked at her beautiful face and blinked. It's indeed very difficult. If there's a reward, I'll be even more motivated. Su Yuqing smiled and stood up. I'll wait until you're done sorting out the core. After saying this, she rushed out of the core world. Lu Ye's voice came from behind her. You said it. After watching Su Yuqing leave, Lu Yi finally calmed himself down. After a short while his figure flickered and he entered the core space. As far as the eye could see, the core source was like a great sun. However, it was different from when he first saw it. At this moment, the core source was no longer shrouded in blood-red light. Instead, it was pure and flawless. The core source was unharmed, but the entire core world had yet to be sorted out. Lu Yi directly jumped onto the core source and sat down cross-legged. With his identity as the master of the core source, he investigated the entire core world. He extended the power of the talent tree, and slowly refined the remaining power of the precious blood. He didn't need to worry about the 9 provinces. Not to mention that there were now 4 late-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivators overseeing the 9 provinces. There were even 2 in the Sunshine Realm. Lu Yi believed that while he was sorting out the core world, Su Yuqing and Chen Xianhai would take good care of the 9 provinces. Day after day, year after year, sorting out the core world was extremely boring, but Lu Yi didn't dare to be careless. Otherwise, if there was even a little bit of the precious blood's power remaining, it could cause unpredictable consequences. As he continued to refine the remnant power of the treasure blood, Lu Yi could feel his own holiness growing. At this moment, he really wanted to know how much power Blazing Heaven would have been able to display if he hadn't died and stood in front of him. If he had used his holiness to suppress him, how much power would he have been able to display? Before refining the blood ancestor's precious blood, his own divine nature was already incomparable to that of the blood race. Now that he had refined a drop of the blood ancestor's precious blood, his divine nature had grown even more. This kind of suppression was fatal to the blood race. Su Yuqing and Chen Xianhai would occasionally come to the core world to investigate the situation, but they didn't disturb him. Only once did Lu Yi take the initiative to contact Su Yuqing. He learned that they were now in the 9 provinces and were living leisurely and comfortably. For the two of them, all they had to do now was wait. It wouldn't be long before the core world led the eastern core world over. In the future, when the southern core world and the western core world returned, the hominid race would be unified. Both Rizhao and Qin Xianhai were looking forward to this. Mount Fengsuan had been divided for a long time. In their generation, they finally had the opportunity to restore the glory of their ancestors. Everyone felt honored. Nearly 3 years passed by in a leisurely manner. On this day, Lu Yi carefully examined the core world several times. After confirming that there was no more power left in the core world, he let out a long sigh of relief. Including the 3 years he had spent refining the precious blood, he had spent a total of 6 years in the core world. During this time, he hadn't cultivated, so his strength hadn't increased at all. But in his opinion, it was all worth it. First of all, although his strength hadn't increased, his divine nature had undergone earth-shaking changes. In the future, when he faced the blood race again, even if it was Rizhao, he would be able to deal with them calmly. Moreover, he had become the core world's master. In the future, he would be the realm master of Mount Fengsuan. In this way, the hominid race would become the strongest backing of the 9 provinces. When he traveled outside, he wouldn't have to worry about any problems in the 9 provinces. After 6 years of hard work, he had reaped all these benefits. He had profited greatly. As for his own strength, he could make up for it with a trip to the 10,000 Elephant Sea after the matters here were settled. Moreover, after so many years of consolidation, Yu Yao's mid-stage cultivation base was stable enough. Delighted, Lu Yi came out of seclusion. His figure flickered, and he exited the core world. "Lord!" A familiar voice immediately rang out. Lu Yi turned around and found that it was Xiang Yin and her sister, who had been guarding here all this time. Lu Yi nodded slightly and turned to look in a certain direction. He could vaguely feel that there was something very close to him rapidly approaching. It seemed to be a part of him that was missing. He immediately understood that Mount Fengsuan in the east was coming. That feeling of missing something was the core world's master's intuition. It wasn't that he was missing something. "Where are senior brother Qin Xianhai and senior sister Su Yuqing?" Lu Yi asked. Xiang Yin immediately replied. The two of them left a few days ago to welcome Mount Fengsuan in the east. Madam said that there would be some turbulence in this fusion, so they had to return to the east to oversee it. Madam also asked me to pass on a message to Lord. Please oversee the core world and maintain stability. Lu Yi nodded. I understand. After carefully sensing for a while, he confirmed that Mount Fengsuan in the east would fuse in less than a few days. Lu Yi decided to wait in the core world. He instructed, "You two can leave. You're not needed here anymore." Yes. Xiang Yin and her sister accepted the order and left, heading straight in the direction of the 9 states. Lu Yi raised his head and glanced at the blood-smelting realm in the distance, suppressing the sudden throbbing in his heart. No matter what, the fusion of Mount Fengsuan was a top priority. He had to resolve this matter first. Once again, he flashed into the inner world and waited quietly. A few days later, Lu Yi, who was overseeing the core world, suddenly opened his eyes. Even though he couldn't see anything, he could clearly sense that Mount Fengsuan in the east was coming. Almost at the instant this thought appeared in his mind, heaven and earth changed. A loud buzzing sound rang out from all directions. The space of the core world became distorted, and the entire world seemed to become much more complete all of a sudden. The territory was also rapidly expanding. It wasn't expanding. Instead, it was like the missing pieces of a puzzle had been pieced together. And this piecing together caused the core world, and even the east, to tremble and become restless. Lu Yi raised his hand. With a thought, he mobilized his origin power. It was like a large invisible hand, brushing past the turbulent area. In an instant, the turbulent area became peaceful. The turbulence caused by the fusion of Mount Fengsuan in the east and the core world lasted for half a month. After half a month, when the dust had settled, Lu Yi could clearly sense that the core world had expanded many times. There were also many more familiar sceneries that originally belonged to Mount Fengsuan in the east. End of chapter. Chapter 1820. The integration of Fengsuan Mountain in the east went extremely smoothly. Other than some disturbances within the realm, there were no substantial losses. The news spread from the east to the south and west. Many of the minims were extremely excited. In a few decades at most, Fengsuan Mountain, which had been divided for countless years, would be united once again. The entire minims were filled with anticipation. Within Fengsuan Mountain, Lu Yi calmly sensed his surroundings. After the east was integrated, he could clearly sense that his control over this realm had not weakened. Instead, the foundation of the realm that he could mobilize had become even stronger. Back then, he had used the foundation of his inner world to suppress sunshine of the insect race, greatly reducing his strength. In the end, he had killed him. If he had controlled Fengsuan Mountain back then, the suppression of sunshine of the insect race would have been even more intense. After the east was integrated, the minims from top to bottom started to get busy. After all, the entire inner world had expanded and many things would change. These changes would require the minims to slowly adapt to. However, it was clear that the cultivation environment of Fengsuan Mountain was much better than the east. This was undoubtedly more beneficial for the growth of the minims. Moreover, there was originally a spirit jade mine in the inner world. In the entire universe, this was a capital that only the top realms possessed. Lu Yi sensed that after the east was integrated, the spirit jade mine showed signs of growth. Although the growth was slow, it was indeed growing. This made Lu Yi imagine what would happen to the spirit jade mine after the south and west were integrated and Fengsuan Mountain was complete. It would take some time to settle down in the east. Lu Yi did not get involved. With the three sons overseeing the east, there would not be any trouble. With a leap he left Fengsuan Mountain. Looking up, to the left of Fengsuan Mountain, in the distant void, was the 9 prefectures. To the right was the blood refining realm. The 3 realms were distributed in a triangular manner and gathered in this part of the universe. Lu Yi's gaze turned towards the blood refining realm. He channeled his spiritual power and flew over. 4 hours later, they arrived at the blood refinement realm. Back when Yu Yao was in the true lake realm, she had only felt that the blood refinement realm was incomparably huge. Now that she was here again, she realized that the realm that she had once felt to be huge was nothing more than that. The entire blood refining world was now peaceful. Countless humans lived in it. Because the 9 regions had swallowed a large amount of the blood refining realm's foundation, the blood refining realm's level was undoubtedly very low in terms of the realm level. The entire realm's spirit chi was not very rich, and it could barely breed some low-level cultivators. Lu Yi reckoned that if he didn't interfere, the humans born from the blood refinement realm would only be able to advance to the Cloud River tier at most, even if they embarked on the path of cultivation. After that, there would be no room for improvement. But now, all the major sects in 9 regions had set up a Taoist field in the blood refining world, where the cultivators of their own sect taught the cultivation of the human race in the blood refining world. If there were outstanding talents, they would be brought to 9 regions. The blood refining realm had long become a place for the 9 regions to select talents. Not to mention the other sects. Just the Jade Blood sect had recruited many good seedlings from the blood refining realm, since the blood refining realm was conquered. Lu Yi hadn't been to the blood refining realm for many years. Strictly speaking, he hadn't been here since the end of the war with the blood refining realm. Back then, his cultivation wasn't high and his knowledge was shallow. He couldn't see anything special about it. But today, Lu Yi had a different feeling. The blood refining realm was actually not very suitable for the human race to live in. After all, this realm was formed from the remains of the blood ancestor's body after his death. The various things in this realm were more suitable for the blood race. The human race could survive here, but the average lifespan wasn't long. This was undoubtedly the influence of the environment, and this influence was everywhere. The human race couldn't avoid it. Previously, when Lu Yi was sorting out the inner world, Chen Xianhai and Su Yuqing had nothing to do, so they had traveled around the blood refining realm for a while. With their knowledge and experience, they had undoubtedly discovered this problem. A few days ago, Chen Xianhai had suggested to Lu Yi that he should find an opportunity to move all the humans in the blood refining realm to 9 regions. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any problems in the short term. But in the long run, the lifespan of the humans living in the blood refining realm would become shorter and shorter. Sooner or later, there would be a risk of extinction. This wasn't difficult. The Pillar of Tianji had the ability to teleport. 9 regions only needed to gather a group of cultivators to assist in the migration of the humans in the blood refining realm. Settling the humans in the blood refining realm wasn't a troublesome matter. The territory of 9 regions was enough to settle these humans. They hadn't done this before, mainly because no one had realized the problem with the blood refining realm. Moreover, 9 regions didn't have a deep foundation at that time, so large-scale teleportation would consume the foundation of 9 regions. Lu Yi already had a plan in mind. When he returned, he could go to the 9 regions' Guardian Palace and talk to the current Guardian. The Guardian Palace would come forward and work together with the strength of 9 regions to formulate a plan for the migration of the humans in the blood refining realm. When the time came, he just had to execute the plan according to the plan. Lu Yi didn't come here because of this matter. Instead, as early as 3 years ago, when he returned with the inner world, he felt a strange connection between himself and the blood refining realm. It was just that Lu Yi had no time to think about this, because he had to sort out the inner world before. This feeling became more obvious after he finished sorting out the inner world a few days ago. Lu Yi had traveled between 9 regions and the 10,000 Elephant Sea many times, and every time, he would pass by the blood refining realm. He had never felt this before, but the last time he came back with the core, he felt it. This was obviously not right. It seemed unlikely that the changes in the blood refining realm would cause this feeling to appear, because the blood refining realm hadn't changed much. Therefore, the problem lay with him. He had refined a drop of the blood ancestors' precious blood. During the process of sorting out the inner world, he had completely refined the remaining power of the precious blood, so the feeling had become more direct. It was obvious that the blood refining realm was formed by the blood ancestors' remnant body. He had refined a drop of the blood ancestors' precious blood, and it was the power of this drop of blood that allowed him to sense the blood refining realm. Lu Yi wanted to know the source of this feeling and what changes it would cause, so he needed to come and investigate in person. In fact, there was one thing he was a little puzzled about. According to the available information, after the blood ancestor died, his remnant body turned into several parts. One part of his body, one part of his head, one part of his limbs, and one part of his body. After a long period of evolution, each part had turned into a paradise for the blood race to live in, becoming a realm of its own. In the current starry sky, although the blood race controlled many realms, only these few realms could be considered the foundation of the blood race. Even though these worlds hadn't reached the level of a top-level world, they were all top large-scale worlds. Especially the blood origin world formed from the head. It was said that it was already showing signs of evolving into a top-level world. If the other realms formed by the remnant body were so amazing, why was the blood refining realm formed by the body so weak? Lu Yi did not know what had happened to the blood refining realm, but he felt lucky. If the blood refining realm had been strong enough, there would not have been an expedition back then. Today, the 9 states would have been enslaved by the blood refining realm, and the human race would have become food for the blood race. Collecting his thoughts, Lu Ye's figure drifted, and he felt at ease. He saw many blood ponds, which were all over the blood refining world. They were originally the most beloved training grounds of the blood clan. If a blood clan member entered the blood ponds, they would have a chance to obtain the saint blood. If they could refine the saint blood, they could become saint sovereigns. Even if they could not find the saint blood, if they were lucky enough to survive, their strength would increase greatly. Of course, the risk was great. Basically, entering the blood pools was a situation of 9 deaths. However, compared to the many blood race members in the galaxy, the blood refining realm was undoubtedly blessed. This was because they had a very direct way to obtain the sacred blood. On the other hand, the stronger blood race members in the galaxy would not have an easy time obtaining the sacred blood. Gazing at these blood pools, Lu Yi felt that if he entered them, he might have a chance to find the remaining sacred blood. However, this was not very attractive to Lu Yi. His own sacred nature was already very terrifying. Refining the sacred blood would not increase his strength by much. He continued to drift. Soon he sensed something. As he moved through the blood-refining realm, the vague feeling also changed. Sometimes it was strong, sometimes it was weak. Lu Yi followed the changes in this feeling and explored until he finally arrived at a place. Jade Pillar Peak. There were a few famous places in the blood-refining realm from north to south. Towering Sky Peak and Jade Pillar Peak were two of them. These two spiritual peaks were the highest in the blood-refining realm. They were located at the Blood Ancestor's chest. Below them was the Cloudvine Plain. Below them was the Divine Gate Sea, which Feng Wujiang had led the 9 states human race to occupy. Jade Pillar Peak was a mess. Back then, the final battle between the cultivators of the 9 states and the upper echelons of the blood race in the blood refinement realm had taken place on the Jade Pillar Peak. In that battle, the Divine Sea of the 9 states had sent out many people who had participated in the expedition. Many blood race Saint Venerables from the blood refinement realm had used some unknown method to fuse their saintly nature and create an extremely powerful blood-colored giant. Unfortunately, it was still killed by the cultivators of the 9 states. Even after so many years, the traces of the battle had not completely disappeared. At the center of Jade Pillar Peak, there was a huge pool of blood. Lu Yi flashed to the side of the pool and stared down. He could feel that the source of the feeling was deep below. It was not that he had never entered a pool of blood before. Back then, he had dared to enter as a true Lake Realm cultivator, let alone now. Therefore, he did not hesitate and dove in. Magic power enveloped his body. The sticky blood around him could not obstruct him at all. Lu Yi dove down. In this dark environment where there was no light, there was not much pressure. Instead, he felt like a fish in water. Lu Yi vaguely felt that this had something to do with his powerful holiness. Otherwise, other blood breeds would not have been so relaxed. Lu Yi indeed found sacred blood here. He casually refined it. It was better than nothing. After an unknown period of time, his body suddenly became light. The thick blood water that enveloped him disappeared at this moment, and he fell into a huge chamber. End of chapter. Chapter 1821. Lu Yi clicked his tongue in wonder. He had once ventured deep into a place like the blood pool to search for the missing Lan Qiyue, but he hadn't encountered anything like today. Thus, he had never imagined that there would be a space below the blood pool that wasn't filled with blood. Truth be told, he hadn't explored the blood refining realm enough. After the great victory of the blood refining expedition, he hadn't explored the blood refining realm in depth. Back then, his strength was limited and he couldn't act rashly. Later, his strength slowly grew, but he came and went in a hurry every time. How could he have the time to explore the blood refining realm? If he had the time, he might as well cultivate and increase his strength. If he hadn't sensed something after refining the blood progenitor's precious blood, he wouldn't have come here. As he urged his magic power, fireballs shot out in all directions. Soon the large space was illuminated with light. Lu Yi looked around and fixed his gaze on a spot to the side. Imprinted in his vision was an incomparably large oval-shaped object. It was grayish-brown in color and looked like a solid rock. But strangely, the surface of the huge rock was covered in strange patterns, like dried blood vessels. The most eye-catching thing was that at the center of the rock was a huge crack. Inside the crack, there was something faintly discernible. This thing was the source of Lu Ye's reaction. There was almost no need for Lu Yi to investigate. At this moment, he finally knew what the source was. Precious blood. The blood progenitor's precious blood. In the depths of the blood refining realm's Jade Pillar Peak, there was actually a drop of the blood progenitor's precious blood. This caused his expression to turn solemn. His right hand slowly pressed against the mountain pan saber, as he secretly urged his magic power. The drop of precious blood he had encountered in the inner world had left a deep impression on Lu Yi. That thing had developed an ignorant spiritual intelligence over the long years, and had almost corroded the core. Zhou Ran and the other first-generation members of the blood race were completely powerless in front of it, and could be easily crushed. If it weren't for Old Fong's protection, Lu Yi would have been doomed in that battle. Once bitten, twice shy. Lu Yi didn't know what the situation was with this drop of precious blood, and whether it had developed its own sentience. If it did, it would be troublesome. However, after thinking about it, this didn't seem very likely. If this drop of precious blood had truly developed intelligence, it would have been impossible for it to not react at all. Lu Yi gradually relaxed. Lu Yi carefully sensed the treasure blood and confirmed that there was nothing wrong with it. Only then did he move forward, quickly arriving in front of the huge gray rock. Looking from afar, the rock was huge, but looking closer, it seemed even bigger. Lu Yi looked at it carefully and suddenly understood what this rock was. This was undoubtedly the Blood Ancestor's heart. He had come down from the blood pool on top of Jade Pillar Peak. In terms of position, this was indeed the chamber where the heart was located. However, the Blood Ancestor had been dead for an unknown number of years, and there was no sign of life left in the heart. That was why it looked like a rock. Staring at the huge hole in the heart, Lu Yi became more and more curious. What kind of powerful existence could actually cut down the Blood Ancestor? This hole was undoubtedly a wound. The precious blood was hidden deep within the wound. Lu Yi stared at the drop of precious blood. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that something was wrong. This drop of precious blood gave him an abnormal feeling. The divine power contained within it was very thin. However, there was no doubt that this was precious blood. Why was it like this? Looking more carefully, Lu Yi gradually became aware of something. He immediately activated the insight spirit pattern to enhance his eyes. In the next moment, he saw an aura that was almost imperceptible to the naked eye escaping from the precious blood. It slowly floated up and merged with the blood pool above. So it was like this. Lu Yi understood what was wrong with the precious blood and how the blood refinement realm's sacred blood came about. Based on his current observation, the sacred blood was undoubtedly a product of diluted precious blood. This drop of precious blood had existed here for an unknown number of years, and its sacred nature was constantly dissipating. After merging with the blood pool above, drops of sacred blood were born. This was why Lu Yi felt that there was something wrong with the drop of precious blood in front of him. This drop of precious blood was empty and did not have the sacred nature that a normal drop of precious blood should have. There was no doubt that there was no problem with this deduction. After all, when he condensed precious blood, he was constantly tempering his own vitality. It could be said that precious blood was the essence of his vitality. Thinking about it this way, any drop of the Blood Ancestor's blood could be called sacred blood. After the sacred blood was condensed, it would be the Blood Ancestor's precious blood. Since sacred blood could be condensed into precious blood, after the precious blood dissipated, it would naturally become sacred blood. In comparison, Lu Yi was undoubtedly inferior to the Blood Ancestor in terms of life force. This was because his precious blood was only equivalent to a drop of the Blood Ancestor's ordinary blood. So, if Lu Yi had discovered this place a few hundred or 1,000 years later, perhaps even this drop of precious blood would not have remained. Understanding this point, Lu Yi stretched out his hand to grab that drop of saint blood. Although it only had a superficial appearance, compared to ordinary saint blood, this thing's enhancement of saint nature could not be ignored, so Lu Yi naturally did not plan to let it go. However, at this moment, on the surface of the stone heart that had died a long time ago, lines of patterns suddenly lit up, turning into a barrier that enveloped the entire heart. Lu Yi's hand did not manage to grab it. Under the sudden change, he instinctively retreated. Defensive spirit patterns quickly formed in front of him, and at the same time, he pulled out the mountain blade at his waist. At the same time, Lu Yi felt that the space around him was turbulent, and it took a while for it to slowly calm down. The chamber was quiet, and Lu Yi's face flickered under the illumination of the fireballs hanging in the air. He stared at the barrier for a while before slowly putting away his blade. The barrier slowly disappeared, and everything returned to normal. Lu Yi stepped forward and carefully tried to extract the drop of precious blood. But in the end, he touched the barrier again. When the barrier appeared, the same thing happened again. The space around him trembled, and then slowly calmed down. Lu Yi was greatly surprised. because someone had actually left a seal here. He did not know who had left it, but it was most likely the powerhouse who had killed the blood ancestor. The other party's methods were simply too shocking. Who knew how many years had passed, but the sealing power still existed. From the looks of it, although the other party was very strong, there was not much they could do about the blood ancestor's precious blood, so they had left it here and let it slowly dissipate on its own. The vein-like patterns on the heart he had seen before were actually a part of the seal. This kind of seal was actually not very meaningful to Lu Yi, because he only needed to stimulate the power of his talent tree to slowly devour and refine the power of the seal, then break it. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi did not immediately do so. Instead, he flew up. A moment later, he returned to Jade Pillar Peak. Looking around, he found that his surroundings were a mess. Obviously, this was caused by the 2 times he had touched the barrier. The turbulence was not only in the chamber he was in, but also in Jade Pillar Peak. Spreading out his powerful divine sense, Lu Yi quickly discovered that the turbulence had spread to the entire blood refining realm. Some buildings had collapsed, and in the villages, many humans rushed out in panic, most likely thinking that it was an earthquake. The migration of the blood refining realm's humans was about to begin. Originally, Lu Yi did not think that this matter was urgent, but now it had become the first thing to do, because he had to take out the drop of precious blood in the blood ancestor's heart and refine it. This process would definitely cause the entire blood refining realm to be in turmoil, and it was very likely that it would cause casualties. After all, most of the humans in the blood refining realm had never cultivated. As for leaving the drop of precious blood alone, it was impossible. Even though it was now only an appearance, Lu Yi was really worried that it might suddenly develop spiritual wisdom. This was related to the blood ancestor, so he could not be careless. Therefore, this drop of precious blood must be refined as soon as possible, not to improve his own divine sense, but to prevent future troubles. Thinking of this, Lu Yi immediately set off in the direction of the 9 continents. More than an hour later, Lu Ye's figure appeared in the Tian Continent's Guardian Hall. After a few years, the Guardian here had changed. After exchanging instructions with the Guardian, news quickly spread out in all directions. 3 days later, in the Guardian Hall, many cultivators of the 9 continents gathered together. Some of them were constellation cultivators, while most of them were spirit sea cultivators. However, regardless of whether they were constellation cultivators or spirit sea cultivators, each of them represented a sect. These sects, without exception, all had their own Taoist temples in the blood refining realm. There were many people here, nearly 1,000 of them. No one knew what had happened, but since Lu Yi had summoned them, no sect in the 9 continents dared to ignore it. In the square outside the Guardian Hall, many cultivators were whispering to each other, trying to find out the reason for this large-scale gathering, but no one said anything. It was not until Lu Yi appeared and told the truth that many cultivators were in an uproar. After so many years, the cultivators of the 9 continents had long been accustomed to the blood refining realm. There were a large number of humans living in the blood refining realm. These sects could freely select suitable talents from the areas where their Taoist temples were located and bring them back to train. Now they were suddenly asked to migrate all the humans in their Taoist temples to the 9 continents. This was undoubtedly a bit sudden. After all, for the migration of a large number of humans, the first thing to do was to plan the resettlement problem, which was not an easy task for any sect. Fortunately, Lu Yi, as the guide of the 9 continents, had brought too many benefits to the 9 continents over the years and had accumulated enough prestige. With a simple explanation, many sects expressed their full cooperation. Moreover, Xiaojie was secretly helping in this matter. With the help of the transmission of the Pillar of Tianji, such a large-scale migration was not difficult. The major sects of the 9 continents only needed to make arrangements. As for whether the humans of the blood refining realm were willing to come to the 9 continents, there was no need to ask. In the past, only humans with good enough qualifications could be brought to the 9 continents. Now anyone could do it. Where could such a good thing be found? Chapter 1822. All the major sects of the 9 provinces were mobilized to make preparations in advance and inform the human race of the blood-refining realm that a great migration had begun. There was no resistance throughout the entire process, and it lasted for 3 months before it ended. After migrating from the blood-refining realm to the 9 provinces, the human race who originally lived in the blood-refining realm had arrived in a more favorable environment. Perhaps they would feel unfamiliar for a short period of time, but this was not a big problem. After 1 or 2 generations, their descendants would become the natives of the 9 provinces and would inevitably be completely integrated with the 9 provinces. Lu Yi checked the entire blood-refining realm and confirmed that there were no longer any creatures remaining. Only then did he return to the Jade Pillar Peak and go deep into the underground chamber. With his previous probing, Lu Yi knew that once he made a move, he would definitely trigger the invisible seal. Previously, he had been worried about the human race in the blood-refining realm, but now that he no longer had any misgivings, he immediately went all out. When the seal was triggered, the feeling of turbulence came again and soon spread throughout the blood-refining realm. Lu Yi did not care and directly urged the power of the talent tree. Invisible roots wrapped around the barrier in front of him and began to refine it. According to his guess, this seal was left behind by the almighty powerhouse, who killed the blood ancestor, in order to seal the drop of blood ancestor's blood. From this, it could be seen that even the unknown powerhouse had no good way to deal with the blood ancestor's blood. They could only use this method to slowly dissipate the power of the blood. It did not take Lu Yi too long to refine the barrier. After all, this thing had existed for countless years, and its power had long been reduced. In just 10 days, the barrier had completely disappeared. During the entire process, the blood-refining realm could be said to be constantly shaking. Almost all the buildings left behind by the human race had collapsed. One could imagine that if the human race in the blood-refining realm had not migrated to the 9 provinces in advance, there would have been countless innocent casualties. During the refining process, Lu Yi also observed the seal. Because there were traces of spirit patterns on it, he had gained quite a bit. 10 days later, when the barrier had completely disappeared, Lu Yi flashed into the broken heart and grabbed the drop of blood ancestor's blood. He continued to urge the power of the talent tree and madly refined it without caring about the consumption. Although he had guessed before, when he really began to refine it, Lu Yi found that this drop of blood ancestor's blood was indeed very incomplete compared to the one he had refined in the inner world. Strictly speaking, this second drop of blood ancestor's blood was very incomplete. In comparison, this second drop of blood ancestor's blood was not even 10% of the previous one. After all, the blood ancestor's blood had been refined. As time passed, the power of the treasure blood gradually disappeared. Lu Yi gradually developed an extremely strange feeling. This feeling was very strange. His thoughts were scattered, and his perception of his body gradually became blurry. What replaced it was an extremely strange feeling. It was as if he had suddenly put on a heavy armor. There was a strange feeling, but also a kind of oppressive pressure. He's blood's blood of ancestors blood ancestor. He's bloods wills blood's realms. S's of blood realm. He of these blood of them's blood realm. He wanted to turn his head and look around, but he couldn't even feel his head. All he could feel now was an extremely heavy body. Lu Yi was shocked and suddenly opened his eyes. That wonderful feeling disappeared without a trace at this moment. He looked down and found that his limbs were still intact. He touched his neck and found that his head was still there. The second drop of blood ancestor's blood had been completely refined, but Lu Yi was still sitting in the hole in the blood ancestor's heart, a thoughtful look on his face. He vaguely knew what had happened before, but this kind of thing was really strange. Even with his experience, it was hard to imagine. Thinking back to what he'd felt before, Lu Yi closed his eyes again. Soon he entered that strange feeling again. It seemed that this kind of thing wasn't too difficult for him. This was undoubtedly related to the blood ancestor. His body was incomparably heavy, and he couldn't feel his limbs or head. It was as if he had put on an extremely heavy armor, making it difficult for him to breathe. But in reality, his limbs were still intact. The reason he felt this way was purely because his mind had already radiated out to the entire blood-refining realm. The heavy armor covering his body was the entire blood refinement realm itself, which was why Lu Yi felt as if his limbs and head had all disappeared. This was because the blood ancestor's body had been cut off. The current blood refining realm was like an incomparably large armor. Lu Yi even had a feeling that he could control the blood ancestor's body and use it as a real armor. As for what kind of power he could display while controlling it, he didn't know. But in the end, this was the blood ancestor's body. So in terms of quality, it was undoubtedly very high. Lu Yi understood that this was a change brought about by refining the treasure blood. The treasure blood was the treasure blood of the blood ancestor, and the blood refinement realm was the remnant body of the blood ancestor. There was an extremely close connection between the two. After refining the treasure blood, he naturally had a certain degree of control over the remnant body of the blood ancestor. Immersing his mind, Lu Yi attempted to control the blood refining realm. In an instant, the entire realm began to shake. A far more terrifying commotion than when he had broken through the first layer of the seal erupted from every corner of the blood refining realm. Giant spirit peaks collapsed, mountains collapsed, and torrents swept out in all directions. In the vast divine watchtower sea, the dark red water boiled. And even though there was no wind, the waves reached hundreds of meters high. It was a scene of doomsday. If the humans of the blood refining realm still had a chance to survive when he had broken through the seal, then after this attempt, it was impossible for any living being to continue living in the blood refining realm. If someone were to stand in the starry sky and observe the blood refining realm, they would discover that the entire realm was constantly shaking. Half a day later, this terrifying change slowly subsided. Near the hole in his heart, Lu Yi frowned. He found that with his current strength, controlling the blood refining realm was somewhat difficult. He couldn't support this extremely heavy armor. This was completely different from his control of the core world. In terms of size, the core world was not inferior to the blood refining world in the slightest. In fact, it was even larger. However, because he had refined the core origin, it was extremely easy for him to control the core world. This was because during the process of controlling the core world, he only needed to use a small part of his strength. The blood refining realm was different. Even though he had refined the blood ancestor's blood, he couldn't do the same thing. Strictly speaking, he wasn't the master of the blood refining realm. He only had the possibility of controlling it. Lu Yi didn't continue to try. He felt that if he wanted to control the blood refining realm with his own strength, he would have to at least advance to the sunshine realm. Moreover, even if he could control it, it didn't seem to be of much use. He could wear the Dragon Emperor's armor to fight the enemy, but he couldn't wear the blood refining realm. This thing had no head, no hands, and no feet, so it wouldn't be able to do much damage. Therefore, there was no need to try anymore. However, before giving up, Lu Yi suddenly had an idea. He couldn't control the blood refining realm by himself. What if he supplemented it with his blood clones? He didn't know what would happen if he placed his blood clones in various parts of the blood refining realm and used them together. However, he couldn't try this for the time being. Ever since he returned to the 9 regions with the inner world, he had been busy. He had only condensed 2 drops of blood during the migration of the human race in the blood refining realm. Now that he had nothing important to do, he decided to spend some time condensing his own blood. Moreover, he had a feeling that after refining the blood ancestor's blood, the amount of blood he could store had increased by a lot. For the time being, he wasn't in a hurry to go to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Now that the situation at Fengsuan Mountain had just stabilized, Lu Yi planned to stay in the 9 regions for a while and set off for the 10,000 Elephant Sea after everything had stabilized. After thinking about it, Lu Yi flew out of the blood refining realm and went straight to Fengsuan Mountain. Su Yuqing hadn't fulfilled her promise yet. Now that the inner world had been cleaned up by him and the eastern part had been integrated, she couldn't go back on her word. The 9 regions had changed a lot recently. Now the living creatures in the 9 regions were no longer just the human race. There were often cultivators from the flower race, the wood spirit race, and the spore race walking around the 9 regions. The human race had also gradually interacted with the cultivators of the 9 regions. After all, everyone would live next to each other in the future. With the relationship of Lu Yi, there was a natural closeness to each other. The cultivators of the 9 regions had benefited greatly from this. Whether it was the flower race's alchemy skills, or the human race's talisman skills, both had caused a frenzy of popularity in the 9 regions. Although it was impossible for the human race of the 9 regions to surpass the flower race in alchemy because of their bloodline, and it was even more impossible for them to refine talismans that were comparable to those made by the human race, the improvement of the cultivators was obvious. Lu Yi had brought back a lot of resources from the 10,000 Elephant Sea before, so the cultivators didn't have to worry about their cultivation. After the 9 regions had the flower realm to rely on, their foundation had improved greatly. Everything was thriving and developing in a good direction. On this day, in Su Yuqing's bedchamber on the Immortal Spirit Peak, Lu Yi was condensing his own precious blood when Su Yuqing's voice suddenly sounded in his ears. Lu Yi, your blood servant is looking for you outside the realm. Obviously, Su Yuqing, whose whereabouts were unknown, had sensed it and specially sent a voice transmission to inform him. Lu Yi opened his eyes and stopped condensing his precious blood. His figure flickered, and he left the bedchamber. If there was nothing important, the Xiang sisters wouldn't disturb him casually. Since they came to Fengsuan Mountain, something big must have happened. After a short while, outside Fengsuan Mountain, Lu Yi saw the Xiang sisters waiting there. Lord, the Guardian Palace sent a message. They want to invite you to take a look at the insect path. It is said that there are some changes in the insect path. End of chapter. Chapter 1823. Lu Yi did not expect this to be related to the insect path. He was shocked and asked, "What happened?" Xiang Yin shook her head. "I'm not sure about the details." The news came from Yu Yao, who was guarding the insect path. It was passed on to Jiuzhou. When Lu Yi went to the Yuluo domain, he mentioned the insect path to Chou Wu. Only the Yuluo domain had the ability to send Yu Yao cultivators to guard the entrance of the insect path. He was the only Yu Yao in Jiuzhou. It was impossible for her to guard the insect path. The situation in the Qingli Dao world was similar. Wuxia had to guard the domain. The insect path was very important. Therefore, after Lu Yi left, Chou Wu sent a Yu Yao cultivator to guard the entrance of the insect path all year round. However, the insect path had not changed until a few days ago. Yu Yao immediately spread the news. It was passed on to Jiuzhou through the cultivators who were active in the galaxy. The Jiuzhou guardian could not find Lu Yi, so he could only ask Xiang Yin, and Xiang Yin to pass on the message. The insect path was very important to the entire Yuluo domain. Although Lu Yi could use the Soul Clan's ancestral land as a transit point to travel between the Wanxiang Sea and the local galaxy, it would take him 2 months to travel back and forth. However, if the insect path stabilized, the situation would be different. Then, the Yuluo domain would have an insect path directly connected to the Wanxiang galaxy. It would be very convenient for cultivators to travel back and forth. This was very important to the future development of the Yuluo domain. Now any galaxy that had an insect path directly connected to the Wanxiang galaxy had benefited greatly from this. Calculating the time, it had been quite a few years since the insect path had taken shape. Back when he was being chased by Tang Jun, he had inadvertently caused a void collapse. As a result, the two of them had been trapped inside the chaotic insect path. If it weren't for the fact that Lu Yi had a void beast core, the two of them wouldn't have been able to escape, and would have been doomed to die inside. In the chaotic insect path, he and Tang Jun came to an agreement and temporarily joined forces. Tang Jun activated the void beast core's power, which allowed them to escape and enter the Wanxiang galaxy. After so many years, it was not strange for the insect path to have some changes. However, it was still exciting and exciting. This was because not every insect path could be stabilized. In space, there were too many insect paths that were in a state of chaos. However, if living beings ventured in recklessly, they would definitely die. There were also some insect paths that would suddenly disappear after a period of time. Therefore, Lu Yi had never dared to have high hopes for the stability of the insect path in this galaxy. Now that there was a change, no matter what kind of change it wasn't a bad thing. If it really showed signs of stability, then in time, the Jade Conch would have a direct passage to the Wanxiang galaxy. However, no one was clear about the exact situation, so they could only personally investigate. Lu Yi immediately set off. Xiang Yin and her sister had nothing to do, so they followed closely behind. The insect path was not too far away from the Wushuang continent. Lu Yi arrived at the insect path in just a few days. Looking from afar, the huge insect path stretched across the starry sky like the open mouths of beasts. There was a chaotic aura of nothingness coming from it. There was a figure standing on a giant floating continent near the path. There wasn't just one path, but many. Most of them were from the 3 realms who had heard the news and came to watch the show. Some of them were from the 9 states. Lu Yi flew to the floating continent and walked towards a middle-aged man in a green robe. Fellow Taoist Su. The man cupped his fists. Fellow Taoist Lu. Su Yiming from the Jade Conch continent. Lu Yi had met him before. They had fought side by side against the Filth tribe, but they weren't familiar with each other. In the entire Jade Conch continent, he was most familiar with Wan Xiao, followed by He Baichuan who had gone to the Wanxiang Sea. After all, they often interacted with each other. Su Yiming looked at Xiang Yin and her sister behind Lu Yi. Curiosity flashed in his eyes. Are these 2 fellow Taoists from the humanoid tribe? News of the Fengsuan Mountains landing near the 9 states had already spread. The cultivators from the Jade Conch continent were extremely envious. After all, the Fengsuan Mountain had a sunshine powerhouse. It was an unattainable dream of the entire Jade Conch continent. Of course, the Jade Conch continent was also part of the galaxy and had a good relationship with the 9 states. Since the Fengsuan Mountain was the 9 states' backer, it was also the Jade Conch continent's backer. On the Jade Conch continent's side, the realm lord Cho Wu was already preparing to bring people to the Fengsuan Mountain to meet the sunshine powerhouses of the humanoid tribe. He didn't ask for much, just to get familiar with them. He hadn't been able to make the trip because he didn't know what gifts to bring. Xiang Yin and her sister's cultivation was at the late stage of the Yueyao realm. Moreover, they were unfamiliar faces. Su Yiming naturally misunderstood. However, when he asked, he was a little puzzled. This was because Xiang Yin and her sister's physical characteristics were similar to the legendary Snow tribe. Xiang Yin pursed her lips and smiled. We're not from the humanoid tribe. We're the High Lord's servants. Su Yiming was stunned. Obviously, the title of servant had a great impact on him. For a moment he didn't know how to react. He was envious. What's the situation on the path? Lu Yi asked. Based on his current observation, the path in front of him didn't seem much different from what he remembered. Su Yiming came back to his senses and explained. The path showed signs of stabilizing a while ago, but it didn't last long. It only lasted for an incense stick's worth of time, so I didn't dare to rashly investigate it. After an incense stick's worth of time, the path returned to its original state. Only once? Lu Yi asked. Only once. Su Yiming nodded. Lu Yi pondered for a moment. Let's wait and see. One change indeed couldn't reveal anything, but it was still a good start. He decided to wait here for a while. In any case, he had been condensing his own precious blood recently, so it didn't matter where he was. If he could wait until the path changed again, he might be able to see something. Of course, he couldn't stay here forever. He set a deadline of 2 months. Whether or not there were any changes within 2 months, he would leave. The Void Continent was very big. He found a place to sit down while the Xiang Yin sisters stood guard beside him. During this time, cultivators from the 3 realms constantly rushed over to investigate from afar. Even Wuxia came over. While chatting with him, Lu Yi thought of Wuxia's previous request and said, Fellow Taoist, there are some things in the Wanxiang Sea that we can't do without Old Tang. Many of the relationships in the 3 realms island were opened up by him. If he leaves, some things will be difficult to handle. The last time he met Wuxia asked Lu Yi to pass a message to Old Tang. telling him to hurry back to the Qingli Dao world and cultivate in the Wanxiang Sea. However, Lu Yi didn't mention this to Old Tang at all. The main reason was that he explained this to Wuxia. Old Tang's strength was indeed not that great. Once a battle broke out, he wouldn't be able to contribute much. However, for the development of the Three Realms Island he could shine. At this stage, the Three Realms Island really couldn't let him leave. Wuxia waved his hand. As long as there are enough resources, it doesn't matter where I cultivate. I haven't thanked you for the things you sent over a few years ago. The last time Lu Yi brought back a large amount of resources from the Wanxiang Sea, he divided them into 3 portions. The 3 realms each took 1 portion. This was the first time the Three Realms Island had returned to the local star system. Both the Qingli Dao world and the Jade Conch domain were shocked and delighted. No one expected the development of the Three Realms Island to be so good. The spiritual jades from the Wanxiang Sea were so easy to earn. With abundant cultivation resources, Wuxia was naturally not in such a hurry to go to the Wanxiang Sea. You deserve it. Lu Yi didn't have to wait for too long. In less than a month, there were changes in the worm path. As far as the eye could see, the chaotic feeling at the entrance of the worm path was obviously much weaker. Lu Yi had passed through many different types of insect tunnels, so he could roughly judge whether an insect tunnel was stable or not just by looking at it. Looking at the current situation, the changes in the Jade Conch domain were undoubtedly in a good direction. Perhaps it would completely stabilize in a few years. Of course, nothing was absolute. The worm path was not something that could be interfered with by humans. Perhaps one of the changes would cause the worm path to completely collapse and disappear. The changes in the worm path did not last long. Soon it returned to its chaotic state. Lu Yi had a plan in mind. He knew that even if the worm path was really stable, it would not take shape in a short period of time. It would take some time. This was definitely good news for the local star system. He told Su Yiming his judgment, and the latter also showed a happy expression. I'll have to trouble you to take care of things here. The worm path could not be stabilized for the time being. Naturally, Lu Yi would not stay here for long. Now that the condensation of the treasure blood was almost done, and everything in the 9 states and Fengsuan Mountain was stable, he was ready to return to the Wanxiang Sea. It's a small matter. Su Yiming waved his hand. As I said before, Senior Brother Cho Wu of our world is going to visit the senior brothers and sisters of Fengsuan Mountain. Just go. I'll go back and greet them. There's no need to bring any gifts. Thank you, Senior Brother. After a short while, Lu Yi left with the Xiang sisters. A few days later, he returned to the 9 states. After checking on the living conditions of the blood-smelting world's human race in the 9 prefectures, and ascertaining that everything was normal, Lu Yi hurried to Mount Fengsuan. Before he left, he had to inform Su Yuqing and inform Mount Fengsuan that the Jade Conch world was preparing to pay a visit. As soon as he entered Fengsuan Mountain, Chen Xuanhai's voice sounded in his ears. Junior Brother Lu, come to Cloud Sea Peak. Lu Yi paused, identified the direction and flew toward Cloud Sea Peak. Soon, Lu Yi walked into a hall under the guidance of a Cloud Sea Peak cultivator. What surprised him was that not only was Chen Xianhai here, but Su Yuqing and Wu Qima were also here. The 3 ricksats were gathered together. Lu Yi raised his eyebrows. What happened? Usually, even if the 3 ricksats of the eastern region had something to discuss, they could communicate with each other through divine sense. Something that could make the 3 of them sit together was obviously not a small matter. Lu Ye's first reaction should not be that there were some changes in the headquarters of Fengsuan Mountain, right? However, as the master of the origin, if there were any changes in the headquarters, he would definitely be able to detect it immediately. In fact, he did not notice anything unusual. End of chapter. Chapter 1824. In the main hall of the Cloud Sea Peak, there were 3 great suns in the east. This made Lu Yi feel that something must have happened here. Chen Xianhai said, "Sit down and talk." Lu Yi walked straight to Su Yuqing's side and sat down. The latter lowered her head and poured him a cup of tea. Lu Yi picked it up and took a sip. "Junior brother, How effective will your holy nature be when exposed to the blood tribe sunlight? Chen Xianhai asked. Lu Yi was a little confused by this sudden question, but he wasn't surprised that Chen Xianhai knew about this. This was because he had mentioned this to Su Yuqing when they were chatting earlier. Since Chen Xianhai knew about this, it was obvious that Su Yuqing had revealed it to him. Lu Yi put down his teacup and said, "There will definitely be some suppression, but how effective will depend on how strong the other party's holy nature is." Chen Xianhai said, "In the inner world, that blazing heaven sunshine was suppressed by you. What if we use him as a benchmark?" Lu Yi waved his hand. Using blazing heaven as a benchmark is unreliable. That guy wanted to die back then. Even without the suppression of my holy nature, he wouldn't have been able to survive. Only after his death can the blood progenitor's precious blood descend. Moreover, I hadn't refined the blood progenitor's precious blood back then, so my holy nature wasn't as strong as it is now. He paused for a moment before continuing, but the blood tribe naturally suffers from bloodline suppression. In my current state, I am confident that I can kill blazing heaven in a one-on-one battle. Chen Xianhai raised his brows. Then blazing heaven is in the early stages of sunshine? That's right. Lu Yi nodded. Senior brother, are we going to attack the blood tribe? Chen Xianhai had suddenly summoned him here and asked about the suppression of his holy nature, so Lu Yi naturally had some guesses. Su Yuqing said, "It's not that we're going to attack the blood tribe. It's just that the blood tribe in the south is attacking us." Lu Yi frowned. "What's going on?" Su Yuqing explained in detail, and Lu Yi finally understood what was going on. Several years ago, he had placed the core of minuscule mountain near the 9 states. When the seal on the core was lifted, the 3 parts of minuscule mountain were drawn toward the core. The eastern part was the closest and had already merged. The southern and western parts were further away and would take different amounts of time. Now the southern minuscule mountain had barged into a place called the Bloody Extinction Galaxy. And this galaxy was one of the foundations of the blood race. The galaxy where the Bloody Extinction world was located. Even though the South had long since made preparations to conceal traces of Mount Inner Heart as much as possible, the latter's trajectory in the cosmos was ultimately different from that of ordinary asteroids and floating continents. Hence, the vampires were still able to discover some clues. At first, the vampires who discovered Mount Fangsuan in the south didn't realize that it was Mount Fangsuan. They only felt that this mountain-like meteorite was somewhat peculiar and wanted to investigate it. With this investigation, he quickly discovered the problem. Now all of the blood tribe members in the Bloodbath Galaxy were on the move. They wanted to stop the southern minuscule mountain and keep it in the Bloodbath Galaxy. The blood race had an instinctive desire for Fangsuan Mountain, and this desire originated from the blood ancestor. After all, the blood ancestor had tried to encroach on Fangsuan Mountain, but failed in the end. In the past, the blood race had no way to seize Fangsuan Mountain. Now that the southern minuscule mountain had barged into the blood race's galaxy, this was a heaven-sent opportunity. How could the blood race miss it? The southern minuscule mountain wasn't weak as a whole. They had 4 Rizhao, 1 more than the eastern minuscule mountain. However, the minuscule mountain had more Rizhao than the eastern minuscule mountain, and even more Yuyao. How could the minuscule mountain gain any advantage in this battle? Left with no choice, the southern minuscule mountain could only seek help from the eastern and western minuscule mountain. The 3 divisions of Mount Innerheart were originally one family. Although they had been separated along with the division of Mount Innerheart, now that their core had returned, it wouldn't take long for them to reunite again. Faced with the southern minuscule mountain's request for help, the eastern and western minuscule mountain naturally wouldn't hesitate. Su Yuqing immediately thought of Lu Yi after learning of this matter. That was why Chen Xianhai had summoned him to ask about this matter. After learning the reason, Lu Yi immediately said, "Senior brother, I'll go too." He still had a great advantage against the blood race. Even if he encountered Rizhao, who was stronger than Blazing Heaven, he might not be able to pose much of a threat under the suppression of his powerful sainthood. Chen Xianhai nodded. It's good that junior brother has such intentions. Get ready, we'll set off in half a day. The southern minuscule mountains battle had already begun. If they didn't have to wait for Lu Yi, they would have already gone to reinforce him. Lu Yi immediately left Mount Innerheart after leaving Cloud Sea Peak and made some arrangements. In truth, there wasn't much to arrange. He only summoned the Xiang sisters. The Xiang sisters were both late-stage Yu Yao cultivators, and they had refined 1.5 drops of his precious blood. In terms of sainthood alone, they were definitely stronger than most blood race members. They should be able to play a significant role in this battle. Afterward, Lu Yi made a trip to the Nine States Guard Palace and gave a few instructions to the current Nine States Guard Commissioner before returning to Mount Innerheart. The eastern minuscule mountain soldiers had gathered on Misty Peak. Chen Xianhai and Su Yuqing were the leaders, and there were more than 50 Yu Yao. It wasn't that the eastern minuscule mountain only had so many Yu Yao. It was just that teleporting to Mount Innerheart would consume a lot of resources. So the minuscule mountain sent to reinforce the southern minuscule mountain was more important than quantity. As for constellations, there wasn't even a single one. Lu Yi didn't know what the western minuscule mountain's arrangements were like, but he guessed that it was more or less the same. Wuxia was in charge of the array formation, and he would also stay behind to guard the eastern minuscule mountain. After the battle ended, he would be responsible for bringing everyone back. Previously, Lu Yi had used the western minuscule mountain's array formation to come directly to the eastern minuscule mountain. However, from what he saw, the array formation this time was undoubtedly much larger than the last time. There were also more cultivators in charge of the array formation. Everything was ready. With Su Yuqing in the lead, half of the minuscule mountain cultivators in the eastern minuscule mountain stepped onto the array formation. At Wuqima's command, the array formation was activated. Lu Yi stood beside Su Yuqing. In an instant, light surged and filled his eyes. Then the world began to spin. The original silence suddenly turned into a clamor. Intense magic power fluctuations filled the heavens and the earth, and the sounds of killing filled his ears. Lu Yi shook his head and immediately understood that he had already arrived at Mount Innerheart in the southern minuscule mountain. When he raised his head to look, all he could see was the color of blood. Seas of blood of different sizes stretched across the sky like clouds of blood. Many spells and talismans flickered incessantly, and the aura of life was withering from time to time. The situation in the southern minuscule mountain didn't seem too good. Lu Yi wasn't surprised by this. The southern minuscule mountain had a strong foundation, but the minuscule mountain was definitely not weak. In addition, the Blood Tribe had a strong desire for Mount Innerheart, so they had naturally attacked with all their might. If the southern minuscule mountain could handle it, they wouldn't have asked for reinforcements from the eastern and western minuscule mountain. While Lu Yi was still observing the battle, Su Yuqing's voice rang out. "Don't stay here. Don't be in a daze. Find an opportunity to participate in the battle." As soon as she finished speaking, the many Yu Yao who had come with her scattered and entered the battlefield. The one maintaining the array formation in the southern minuscule mountain was an elderly man with white hair. Su Yuqing turned to look at him. "Senior Marshal Brother Yu, I'll help you maintain the array formation." Half of the people in the eastern minuscule mountain still hadn't arrived, so the array formation here naturally couldn't be damaged. Moreover, the Blood Tribe had clearly sensed that the array formation here was meant to receive reinforcements, so their attacks were especially fierce. As soon as Su Yuqing finished speaking, she took out a purple talisman. The purple talisman turned into a barrier, enveloping a large area within it. The attacks of the Blood Tribe landed on the barrier, but they only caused layers of ripples. Although the quality of a purple talisman was inferior to a red talisman, it still depended on who was activating it. When activated by someone like Su Yuqing, the power of a purple talisman was incomparable to that of an ordinary cultivator. Moreover, this purple talisman was refined by Su Yuqing herself. After activating it, its power was comparable to that of a full-powered attack. With Su Yuqing's help, the critical situation here was immediately alleviated. Lu Yi stood beside Su Yuqing and looked around. Spreading out his divine sense, he quickly gained an understanding of the overall situation. The minuscule mountain tribe didn't have the upper hand, but they weren't at a great disadvantage either. Moreover, the western minuscule mountain tribe should have already arrived. This was because there were as many as 5 minuscule mountain tribe battles in the entire battlefield. In other words, there were 10 minuscule mountain tribe cultivators fighting each other. There were only 4 minuscule mountain tribe cultivators in the south. Among them, senior brother Yu was presiding over the array formation here to receive reinforcements, so there were only 3 minuscule mountain tribe cultivators who could participate in the battle. The 2 extra minuscule mountain tribe cultivators were undoubtedly from the west. This made Lu Yi secretly surprised. Although he had inferred from the information he had gathered that the overall strength of the Bloody Despair galaxy was very strong, it was still quite unexpected for a galaxy to have 5 minuscule mountain tribe cultivators. Moreover, he didn't know if this was the full strength of the Bloody Despair galaxy. Just as he was thinking this, the thick clouds broke open, and another minuscule mountain tribe cultivator's aura suddenly descended. Su Yuqing, who was standing beside Lu Yi, couldn't help but have a gloomy expression. If Lu Yi could observe the situation, she could naturally see it as well. The minuscule mountain tribe cultivators were fighting in pairs, each with their own restrictions. As long as Chen Xianhai could rush over, she and senior brother Yu would be able to free themselves. With Chen Xianhai, the minuscule mountain tribe cultivators would have an absolute advantage in terms of minuscule mountain tribe cultivators. But at this critical juncture, another minuscule mountain tribe cultivator came. If such a powerhouse wasn't restrained, the impact on the battlefield would undoubtedly be great. Who knew how many minuscule mountain tribe cultivators would suffer under his hands? She immediately moved to intercept him. But to her great surprise, after the arrival of this minuscule mountain tribe cultivator, a second minuscule mountain tribe cultivator appeared from another direction. Including the previous 5, there were 7 minuscule mountain tribe cultivators from the Bloody Despair galaxy cultivators side. Junior sister, senior brother Yu shouted in a low voice. He also realized the seriousness of the situation. One each. The only way to resolve the crisis was for him and Su Yuqing to take action and restrain the 2 newly arrived minuscule mountain tribe cultivators. But this way, there would be no one to maintain the array here. Chen Xianhai and the rest of the minuscule mountain tribe cultivators in the east wouldn't be able to come to support them. But now that things had come to this, he couldn't afford to hesitate too much. Su Yuqing immediately nodded and rushed towards the first minuscule mountain tribe cultivator to arrive. Senior brother Yu rushed in another direction. Suddenly, 2 more minuscule mountain tribe cultivators appeared in the entire region. The battle was fierce. End of chapter. Chapter 1825. Senior martial brother Yu was in charge of the formation in the south, and a dozen or so Yu Yao were assisting him. Now that senior martial brother Yu had left to deal with the enemy, the remaining dozen or so Yu Yao were barely able to maintain the formation. How could they possibly receive reinforcements? Hence, Zhu Yueyao didn't force the issue. She leaped into action and entered the battlefield, preparing to repel the enemy. In an instant, only Lu Yi and the Xiang sisters were left. Overwhelming attacks came from all directions. Although the humanoid tribe had temporarily given up on the formation, the blood tribe's attacks did not stop. Bloody light filled the air, completely engulfing Lu Yi and the other 2. However, just as the attacking blood tribe members thought that the formation had been broken, and that Lu Yi and the other 2 were dead for sure, the dense bloody light suddenly dissipated. The scene that entered their eyes caused them to widen their eyes in disbelief. A semicircular light barrier enveloped Lu Yi and the other 2. The light barrier didn't seem thick, but it blocked all the attacks and remained unscathed. None of the blood tribe members saw how this light barrier had appeared. It seemed to have appeared out of thin air. Not to mention the blood clan cultivators. Even Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin, who were standing beside Lu Yi, hadn't noticed it. Earlier, when they were about to use their defensive techniques to defend themselves, this light barrier had mysteriously appeared, and its defensive power was unimaginably strong. Defend! Lu Yi commanded calmly. He ignored the many blood tribe cultivators who were glaring at him with hostility, and looked toward the formation that had already stopped operating. With a thought, The formation buzzed and veined patterns flickered. To put it bluntly, the humanoid tribe's formation borrowed the power of the formation to temporarily open up a bug passage for the various tribes. This wasn't the same as a normal bug passage. Because it was temporarily opened, the bug passage would disappear once the formation stopped operating. Moreover, ordinary methods couldn't open up a bug passage. It was precisely because of the uniqueness of Mount Minuscule that this method became reality. A small part of the power that maintained the bug passage came from the cultivators in charge of the formation. The majority of it came from Mount Minuscule itself. In other words, the humanoid tribe cultivators had the ability to borrow the power of Mount Minuscule through the formation and open up a temporary bug passage. This was also why Mount Minuscule required cultivators in charge of the transportation between the tribes. Yu Yao didn't have this ability. The others couldn't, but Lu Yi could. When he arrived in the south, Lu Yi tried to sense the power of Mount Minuscule to see if he could mobilize it. In the end, he found that he could. And just like the inner world in the east, there was no resistance at all. When all was said and done, Mount Fengsuan in the south was still a part of Mount Fengsuan. Lu Yi had refined Mount Fengsuan's quintessence, which meant that he could mobilize any part of Mount Fengsuan's power. The barrier protecting him and Xiang Yin was the manifestation of Mount Fengsuan in the south. It could also be said that it was the power of this world, which was why the barrier had appeared without any warning. How could those blood tribe cultivators, whose cultivation base was only at Yu Yao's level, break through such a barrier? At this moment, under Lu Ye's control, the array that had stopped operating began to hum again. Moreover, compared to when senior brother Yu was in charge of it, it was operating even faster and seemed to be more stable. One figure after another appeared above the formation. Their leader was none other than Chen Xianhai. Over 20 Yu cultivators stood beside Chen Xianhai with clear eyes. They didn't feel as dizzy as they did before. Instead, they were surprised. They didn't know why the teleportation had become so easy. They didn't have time to investigate before they were attracted by the intense fighting going on around them. Chen Xianhai scanned his surroundings and roughly understood the situation. "Kill," he yelled. He took the lead and rushed toward the nearest Mount Minuscule battlefield. The 20 or so Yu Yao cultivators also scattered in all directions, looking for an opportunity to attack. Lu Yi turned to look at where the Yu sisters were. There was a sea of blood there. It was impossible to see what was going on inside with the naked eye. However, with his divine sense, he could clearly see the life force withering inside the sea of blood. He could also hear the cries of blood tribe cultivators. They clearly couldn't understand why the two snow tribe cultivators had suddenly activated a holy aura that was even stronger than their own. It was suppressing their bloodline. After ascertaining that the Yu sisters were engaged in a fierce battle, Lu Yi ignored them. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the battlefield where Su Yuqing had been fighting. In the sky over there, Su Yuqing was engaged in a battle with a thick cloud of blood. Battling against the blood tribe was actually a very troublesome matter. Once the blood sea technique was activated, it would create a favorable environment for the blood tribe cultivators. If an enemy cultivator wanted to kill a blood tribe cultivator, the most effective method was to dive deep into the sea of blood and find the blood tribe cultivator hiding there. However, doing so would result in all kinds of inconveniences. If one wasn't powerful enough, it was very easy for them to fail miserably. Hence, if one didn't have absolute confidence, they would generally choose Su Yuqing's method. They wouldn't dive deep into the blood tribe sea of blood. Instead, they would only engage the blood tribe cultivators outside the sea of blood. They would use their own methods to whittle down the size of the sea of blood and weaken the blood tribe cultivators. Su Yuqing's choice of strategy wasn't wrong. However, such a strategy obviously wouldn't be effective in such a battlefield. If it was really a one-on-one battle, there wouldn't be any problem. However, blood tribe cultivator Rizhao wouldn't fight her alone. At this moment, blood tribe cultivator Rizhao wasn't the only one in the sea of blood. There were many other blood tribe cultivators of all levels. These blood tribe cultivators, regardless of their cultivation level, had all activated the blood sea technique and merged it with Rizhao's sea of blood to strengthen its power. Su Yuqing threw one talisman after another into the blood sea. From time to time, corpses would fall out of the blood sea. They were undoubtedly blood clan cultivators, who had been killed by the power of the talismans. However, such damage to the blood sea was not enough to harm its foundation. She obviously also realized this. She frowned slightly, and thought of a way to break out of this situation. Right now, she could only use the powerful red talisman to forcefully break open the sea of blood. Only then would she have a chance to kill her enemies. Just as she was about to do so, she suddenly saw a ball of blood-red light flying toward her from the side. It was about to merge with the sea of blood that was opposing her. Judging from the fluctuations in the blood-red light, the cultivator's cultivation level wasn't very high. He was only at the middle stage of Moon Jade Realm. Su Yuqing almost instinctively attacked. She wanted to kill this cultivator on the spot, to prevent him from strengthening the enemy's power. However, she soon realized who the cultivator in the blood-red light was because the aura coming from the blood-red light was very familiar to her. The sea of blood didn't reject the sudden arrival of the blood-red light, so the blood-red light was able to merge with it without a hitch. The corners of Su Yuqing's mouth slowly curled up. She continued to tangle with her opponent, waiting for the show to begin. At the same time, she secretly activated her magic power. A purple talisman's light flickered on her fingertip. A moment later, the sea of blood that had been incomparably thick all this time suddenly seemed to have suffered some kind of unexpected damage. In that instant, the entire sea of blood showed signs of collapsing. At the same time, a series of cries of alarm rang out from within the sea of blood. Crash! The blood tribe cultivators with low cultivation levels fell out of the sea of blood, like dumplings being dropped into a pot. Their faces were filled with horror as they fell straight to the ground. The vast sea of blood peeled off layer by layer, as if it were about to collapse at any moment. The blood tribe cultivator Ri was also filled with shock and horror. However, he instinctively activated his power to prevent the sea of blood from collapsing. However, right at this moment, a bright light pierced through the sea of blood's cover and entered his field of vision. It was Su Yuqing who had accurately found his hiding position the moment the sea of blood shook and collapsed. Without any hesitation, she activated the purple talisman's power that she had prepared long ago and brazenly charged in. In the sea of blood, the woman's body was surrounded by purple light, as if she was wearing a purple armor. She charged forward, holding a purple spear that was condensed from the purple talisman's power. She was like a goddess of war who had broken through time and space. The thick sea of blood couldn't stop her at all. The spear had already pierced through Riri's chest. They were so close that their eyes met. Su Yuqing's face was filled with cold murderous intent, while Riri's face was filled with horror. He clearly had a great advantage, but in the blink of an eye, life and death were decided. He didn't understand what had happened at all. He only knew that at that moment, he was suddenly shrouded in a terrifying divine aura, causing him to almost lose control of his own power. Otherwise, with his strength, he could have avoided such an attack. However, it was the suppression of the divine aura that caused him to lose control of his own power that led to this misfortune. His life was not yet extinguished. He gritted his teeth and reached out to grab Su Yuqing. Facing this attack, Su Yuqing had no intention of dodging at all. Suddenly, there was a stunning flash of sword light, and a head flew out. Ri froze on the spot, his hand still in the posture of reaching out. "Why aren't you dodging?" Lu Yi stood behind the headless corpse with his sword, and looked at Su Yuqing with a frown. Even if they were both sunshine experts, they could not underestimate the counterattack of a sunshine expert. Su Yuqing's performance gave him the impression that she was a fledgling with no combat experience. She thought that she could rest easy after she succeeded. "Don't I have you?" Su Yuqing pursed her lips and smiled. Lu Yi stared at her and said, "You have to dodge next time." "Got it." Su Yuqing replied softly with a smile in the corner of her eyes. She seemed to be in a good mood. Lu Yi didn't know the woman's wonderful mood. He had already turned around to kill the blood clan cultivators who had lost their backbone. Su Yuqing followed closely behind. In just a moment, the sea of blood completely collapsed. All the blood clan cultivators, regardless of their cultivation level, were killed on the spot. End of chapter. Chapter 1826. The chaotic battlefield trembled endlessly. The death of the Sunshine Powerhouse brought great shock to both sides. The Blood Breeds didn't expect that one of their own would die so quickly. This was unbelievable to them, because once their Blood Sea technique was formed, they would have an absolute advantage. Unless the difference in strength was too great, it was impossible for them to die. But now this impossible thing had really happened. The Blood Breeds couldn't understand what was going on. The unknown was the greatest fear. So after a short hesitation, the Blood Breeds began to retreat. When the vampires attacked, they were as unreasonable as they were when they retreated. They didn't dare to stay here any longer before they figured out why Rizhao had suddenly died. Especially at this moment, the Blood Breeds were no longer at an advantage. Retreating was undoubtedly the safest way. Although they didn't want to admit it, this attack on Mount Fengsuan was undoubtedly a failure. They could only leave first to preserve their strength and plan for the future. Since the Sunshine Powerhouses had begun to retreat, the Blood Breeds on other levels didn't dare to stay any longer. They all activated their bloody light and fled outside. Lu Yi was about to turn into a bloody light to support the nearest sunshine. How could he bear to see this scene? He was now the rightful lord of Mount Fengsuan. Mount Fengsuan was his other home. The Blood Breeds had suddenly come here to show off their strength. Even though they had already paid the price of Rizhao's life, they still had to ask for his permission before leaving. He stood still in midair. The bloody light dissipated and Lu Ye's figure was revealed. The next moment, he raised his hands and slowly brought them together in front of his chest. There was nothing there, but Lu Ye's movements were extremely difficult, as if he was pushing up a world. Mount Fengsuan in the south suddenly shook and buzzed. Everyone could clearly feel an invisible and indescribable power, spreading from every corner of the world, and gathering in one place. The Blood Breeds didn't know what was going on, but they knew that a disaster was coming. The bloody light dazzled and they ran even faster. After a full 10 breaths, Lu Ye's hands suddenly came together and he shouted, "Seal!" Many blood race cultivators who were about to flee the Fengsuan mountain seemed to have slammed into an invisible barrier. All of them had a look of terror on their faces, because they discovered that they had no way to leave the Fengsuan mountain. The entire world seemed to have been sealed. Lu Yi, on the other hand, revealed a disappointed expression. That was because Rizhao of the blood race was really fast. In just a few breaths of time, only 2 of them were left. These 2 were left because Rizhao of the humanoid race had risked his life to fight them. The rest of them had already left Mount Fengsuan and escaped into the starry sky. This was something that could not be helped. Although he could mobilize the resources of Mount Fengsuan in the south, sealing off an entire domain was not something that could be done in an instant. In the end, it was still because he was too weak and could not bear the burden of mobilizing the power of the entire domain. If he was then the effect would be better. Fortunately, there were still a large number of vampires under the sun that were stopped. At this moment, the Blood Tribe cultivators who wanted to be trapped didn't know what was going on, but they instinctively attacked the seal. Lu Yi could clearly sense that the resources of Mount Fengsuan in the south were flowing away at an extremely shocking speed. At this rate, the resources of Mount Fengsuan in the south would be completely depleted in just a few days. This made him recall the scene of him suppressing Rizhao of the insect race in the inner world. Although that battle had not been very long, it had still caused great damage to the resources of the inner world. From the looks of it, it was best not to mobilize the resources of a domain unless it was absolutely necessary. After all, resources were depleted very quickly, and it was not easy to recover them. The originally tense battle had now been completely one-sided. Rizhao of the Blood Tribe had escaped, causing the morale of the remaining Blood Tribe cultivators to plummet. They were trapped in this domain and could not escape, so they could only fight like cornered beasts. The Xiang sisters worked together, and their auras were like rainbows. Wherever they passed, a rain of blood would be stirred up. When the Yu Yao of the humanoid race saw how powerful the 2 of them were, they all followed behind them. In an extremely short period of time, they formed a small killing squad led by the Xiang sisters. In Rizhao's domain, the two trapped blood tribe cultivators were in great trouble. On the humanoid race's side, there were 4 vampires from the south, and 2 vampires from the east and west. There were a total of 8 vampires against the 2 of them. Even though they had the benefits of the Blood Sea, they were still beaten senseless. In just a short while, the vast Blood Sea had been stripped bare by countless attacks, leaving only its shape behind. The Blood Tribe cultivators who had assisted them in the Blood Sea had all been killed. In the end, only the 2 of them were left fighting like cornered beasts. Sooner or later, they would die an unnatural death. The situation was settled. Only then did Lu Yi undo the seal on the domain. He felt a pang in his heart as he sensed the exhaustion of his resources. At this moment, a mournful cry rang out. Rizhao's aura weakened as he screamed. It was a blood tribe cultivator, Rizhao, who had been besieged to death. The 2 races were mortal enemies, so Rizhao of the humanoid race naturally would not show mercy. The remaining blood tribe cultivator was not far from death. At this moment, the ones besieging Rizhao were the 2 vampires from the east, as well as senior martial brother Yu, and another Rizhao of the humanoid race cultivator that Lu Yi did not recognize. 4 against 1 was an absolute suppression. Looking at the blood tribe cultivator Rizhao, who was desperately resisting even though he was at an absolute disadvantage, Lu Ye's heart trembled. He hurriedly shouted, "Spare his life." As he spoke, his figure flashed toward the battlefield. A moment later, the disheveled blood tribe cultivator Rizhao lay on the ground panting. He had completely become a fish on the chopping board. Beside him, a total of 8 Rizhao of the humanoid race had formed a circle with him in the center, eyeing him covetously. This Rizhao had completely lost the ability to resist. Not only was his strength almost exhausted, but he had also been hit by the humanoid race's sealing talisman. It could be said that his life was completely in the humanoid race's control. His face was full of unwillingness, but there was nothing he could do. He also had some doubts in his heart, because he did not know why the humanoid race wanted to spare his life. Although he did not know the reason, it was better to live than to die. As long as he was alive, there was always a glimmer of hope. This is junior martial brother Lu Yi, right? The oldest, white-haired senior martial brother. You looked at Lu Yi and nodded with gratification. Rizhao was no stranger to Lu Yi. After all, when the Rizhao of the various sects communicated with their soul projections, the topic of discussion was him. Everyone knew that Lu Yi had refined the core origin and was the true master of Mount Fengxuan. At the same time, he was also the successor of the Dao tree lineage. Senior martial brother Yu knew Lu Yi, but Lu Yi did not know him. Su Yuqing introduced him at the right time. This is senior martial brother Yu from the Southern Jade Clarity Tower. Greetings, senior martial brother Yu. Lu Yi hurriedly bowed. Beside Jade Clarity Tower, a burly man nodded slightly to Lu Yi and introduced himself. Southern Sect Wu Ji. Senior martial brother Wu. Lu Yi bowed again. Next, Lu Yi greeted the other Rizhao he had never seen before. In the Southern Sect, other than Jade Clarity Tower and Wu Ji, there were also Su Pu and Xia Yingyue. Of the 2 from the Western Sect, Lu Yi knew one of them. It was Zhang Kuan, who had sent him to the illusory blood demon pupil. The other was Wang Xiong. Regardless of whether they knew each other or not, the Rizhao treated Lu Yi very kindly. Firstly, Lu Yi had indeed made great contributions to Mount Fengxuan. Secondly, it was because of Su Yuqing. In the eyes of the Rizhao, no matter how young Lu Yi was, he was still their junior martial brother. In the future, they would have many interactions. Especially after the 3 sects of Mount Fengxuan had merged, they would see each other frequently. It didn't matter that he was young. As a successor of the Dao Tree sect, as long as he didn't take the wrong path, his future achievements wouldn't be too bad. Junior martial brother, did you just mobilize the Southern Sect's realm force? After everyone got to know each other, Jade Clarity Tower asked. Although he wasn't the master of the realm force and couldn't mobilize the realm force to stop the enemy, the lesser humans were born of Mount Fengxuan and could naturally sense it. Yes. Lu Yi nodded. Well done. Jade Clarity Tower praised. Unfortunately, the blood breeds ran too quickly and couldn't all stay. Hearing these words, the blood breeds Rizhao, who had already lost the ability to resist, finally understood what had happened. He looked at Lu Yi in shock. He was quite knowledgeable, and naturally knew what it meant to be able to mobilize the realm force of a realm. For a moment, his heart was bleeding. Under the premise that a realm lord was overseeing a realm lord, how was invading a realm lord any different from seeking death? He was only glad that Lu Yi's cultivation wasn't high. Otherwise, none of the blood breeds who came here would be able to escape. Junior martial brother, why do you want to keep him alive? Xia Yingyue seemed to be a woman with a bad temper. Perhaps because of the conflict just now, a baleful aura gathered between her brows. She stared at the blood breeds Rizhao with disgust. The blood breeds are evil. Just kill them. Lu Yi looked at her. Senior martial sister Xia, please don't be impatient. I want his life as an experiment. If this succeeds, it will greatly benefit Mount Fangsuan. Even if it doesn't, we won't lose anything. At that time, this blood breeds will be handed over to senior martial sister to deal with. Xia Yingyue looked at him in confusion. What experiment? Su Yuqing vaguely guessed, and immediately used her divine sense to explain to the Rizhao present. After hearing the reason, the Rizhao present all looked at Lu Yi in shock. But at the same time, they were also curious. Under everyone's gaze, Lu Yi slowly walked up to the blood breeds Rizhao. He raised his hand, and a drop of precious blood appeared on his fingertip. He looked at him indifferently. Refine it. At first, the blood breeds Rizhao looked at Lu Yi with an indifferent expression. He had already fallen into such a situation where his life and death were in the hands of others, so he had nothing to worry about. He only hated that he couldn't pass on the news that Mount Fangsuan already had a realm lord to his clansmen. But after seeing this drop of precious blood, and feeling the powerful holiness contained in it, the blood breeds Rizhao couldn't help but widen his eyes. He looked at the precious blood in disbelief, then looked up at Lu Yi. You're our clan saint. End of chapter. Chapter 1827. One couldn't blame Nichi for having such thoughts. Only the saint venerables of his race could condense precious blood. He himself was a saint venerable, but the precious blood he condensed couldn't contain such a strong sense of holiness. Compared to Lu Ye's precious blood, his precious blood was like the glow of a firefly. Compared to Nichi's precious blood, the holiness it contained was extremely weak. The birth of a realm lord in Fangsuan Mountain was already shocking enough, but he never expected that the realm lord was actually a member of his race. However, Lu Yi didn't look like a pure-blood tribe member at all. He was just a human. Suppressing the doubt and shock in his heart, he coldly looked at Lu Yi. Wishful thinking. No matter what was going on with this human in front of him, it was a fact that he killed his own people, so he was undoubtedly an enemy. He knew the consequences of refining such a drop of precious blood, so he naturally wouldn't let Lu Yi have his way. Not only that, but when he finished speaking, his entire aura suddenly became dangerous, causing the surrounding Nichi's expressions to turn cold. The blood tribe's blood explosion technique was famous. This was a secret technique used by the blood tribe to fight to the death. It was also a self-detonation technique, and its power was unparalleled. Even though Nichi was currently sealed by the power of several talismans, and had consumed a lot of his energy in the battle just now, as long as he could mobilize a trace of his chi and blood, he could use the blood explosion technique. In the previous battle, many hominid cultivators had suffered losses from this secret technique. Just as Xia Yingyue was about to attack and kill this blood race member Rizhao, Lu Yi reached out and pinched Rizhao's mouth, his expression calm. What are you talking about? He flicked his precious blood into Nichi's mouth with a finger. The rapidly rising aura of danger came to an abrupt stop at this moment. Nichi reached out and grabbed his neck, as if trying to stop the precious blood from entering his mouth. Then he stuck out 2 fingers and dug into his mouth. But how could it be in time? Suddenly, there was a miserable scream, and a layer of faint golden light enveloped him. Even when he was attacked by several hominid Nichi, and was seriously injured, this blood tribe member didn't show any weakness. At this moment, it was as if he was suffering the most torturous torture in the world, causing the hominid Nichi to feel distressed. To be able to torment someone like him, it must not be an ordinary pain. The battle had come to an end. With Hikari of the Blood Kindred escaping, the cultivators of the Blood Kindred, who were trapped in this world, no longer had the will to fight. They were besieged by the cultivators of the humanoid clan and suffered heavy casualties. The Xiang sisters had made a great contribution. Their powerful holy nature was far more effective against the vampires than the average Yu Yao. Yu Yao led a squad of midgets into the fray, suppressing the enemy to the point where they couldn't even retaliate under her holy nature. At the moment, Vampire Rizhao was enduring the pain of the treasure blood tempering his body, and would continue for a while. Lu Yi stayed behind to observe while Su Yuqing and Xia Yingyue stood guard beside him. The other Rizhao scattered to clean up the battlefield or eliminate the remnants of the vampire army. In less than 2 hours, the originally noisy domain calmed down. High Lord, Xiang Yin and her sister returned bathed in blood. They seemed to be in good condition. Xiang Yin was holding a ball of blood in her hands. Within the ball of blood, there were a few drops of eye-catching blood floating up and down. This was collected from the battlefield. This was undoubtedly the holy blood left behind by the Blood Kindred. According to Lu Ye's conjecture, the holy blood was actually the blood of the blood progenitor. However, because the blood progenitor was so powerful, even her ordinary blood had unimaginable effects. For example, it could allow the Blood Kindred to possess their own holy nature. Of course, the refining process was fraught with danger. However, if they succeeded, they would become a holy venerate among the Blood Kindred. After the death of a holy venerate, the holy blood would be preserved completely. If another Blood Kindred obtained it, they could find an opportunity to refine it. This was how generations of holy venerates of the Blood Kindred had been passed down. Otherwise, the Blood Kindred would have run out of holy blood long ago, after the blood progenitor had died so many years ago. In this battle, 2 Rizhao of the Blood Kindred had died in battle, and 1 had been captured alive. These 3 were undoubtedly holy venerates, so there was holy blood left behind after their deaths. In addition, there were several Yu Yao who were also holy venerates. The Xiang sisters collected all of this holy blood. This thing was a treasure to the Blood Kindred, but it was no different from poison to other races. Lu Yi stretched out his hand and grabbed the drops of holy blood. He directly activated his power and refined them. Xiang Yin was incredibly envious of Lu Yi. Because of the power of the Blood Clan, she had an instinctive desire for Lu Ye's holy blood. However, she knew that holy blood couldn't be refined carelessly, or else her life would be in danger. The best way to increase her holiness was to ask Lu Yi for his blood. Lu Ye's precious blood was much safer to refine, and its effects were almost the same as holy blood. Xiang Yin decided to find an opportunity to mention this to Lu Yi after this battle. After all, she and her sister had done a meritorious service, and they deserved to be rewarded. There's also this. Xianyu offered a storage ring. Lu Yi took it and opened it. He found that it was filled with blood crystals of the Blood Kindred, so he casually tossed it back. Thank you, Lord. Xianyu held the storage ring and expressed his gratitude respectfully. The blood crystals of the Blood Kindred were similar to the monster cores of demon beasts. These things were useless to ordinary cultivators, but the Blood Kindred could refine them like spirit jades to increase their own power. Moreover, the effects were even better than refining spirit jades. It could be said that blood crystals were equivalent to a very special cultivation resource for the Blood Kindred. Lord, we sisters captured a Blood Kindred, and we thought that it might be useful to you, Xiang Yin said. She then looked at the Blood Kindred Rizhao, who was refining the precious blood, and said hesitantly, how about I go and kill that Blood Kindred now? The reason why they deliberately captured the Blood Kindred cultivator alive was mainly because they were inspired by the battle with the sacred blood mountain in the inner world. At that time, Lu Yi had used the precious blood to plant many people in the sacred blood mountain, and they had contributed a lot in the final battle. Xiang Yin didn't expect that the Lord would actually target Rizhao this time. In comparison, the Blood Kindred they captured alive seemed insignificant. There's no hurry. Lu Yi shook his head. The situation here remained to be seen. Perhaps the Blood Kindred could be of some use. Xiang Yin didn't say anything else, and stood quietly to the side. The process seems very dangerous. Will this guy die? Xia Yingyue, who was standing side by side with Su Yuqing, had been observing blood-kindred Rizhao's movements. Seeing that his aura seemed to be rapidly weakening, she couldn't help but ask. Su Yuqing shook her head. She couldn't be sure. Xiang Yin said with a smile. Lord, you may not know, but my lord's precious blood is very special. Although there is torture during the refining process, as long as one's will is strong enough, there won't be any danger to one's life. It's very different from ordinary sacred blood. Her sister, Xianyu, nodded vigorously, indicating that this was indeed the case. Xia Yingyue glanced at the sisters. I've long heard that the snow kindred are as pure as ice and as pure as jade, like fairies in the snow. Seeing them today, they really live up to their reputation. She turned and transmitted her voice to Su Yuqing. Be careful of these two sisters. Su Yuqing was dumbfounded. Be careful of what? Xia Yingyue grumpily said. Your little Dao companion is young and full of vigor. These two sisters are also heavenly beauties with different temperaments. Moreover, they seem to worship your little Dao companion a lot. What do you think we should be wary of? Su Yuqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. But then again, she hadn't asked Lu Yi anything about the matters between men and women. She could only feel that Lu Yi wasn't simple when it came to this matter. He definitely wasn't a greenhorn. She felt that there was no need to be on guard against Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin, because they were Lu Ye's blood servants. If Lu Yi really had any thoughts about them, the two sisters would have long since lost their virginity. But in fact, Su Yuqing knew at first glance that the sisters were still pure as ice and as pure as jade. In the end, blood-kindred Rizhao survived. When the golden light enveloping him gradually dissipated and revealed his figure, he was lying on the ground like a dead fish, drenched in sweat. The reason why his performance was so weak was because his strength was still sealed. Lu Yi stood not far from him and frowned. After a moment, he sighed and turned to Xia Yingyue. Senior sister Xia, kill him. He had wasted a drop of blood, he had painstakingly condensed. But it wasn't a complete loss. At least Lu Yi learned one thing. Even if he let blood-kindred Rizhao refine his blood, he still wouldn't be able to control him completely. It wasn't a completely uncontrollable state. In fact, if Lu Yi ordered him to complete an ordinary task, there wouldn't be a problem. But Lu Yi could feel that blood-kindred Rizhao's submission to him wasn't complete. From time to time, rebellious thoughts would appear in the depths of his mind. This was completely different from the blood servants he had subdued before. The blood servants he had subdued before, whether it was Xiang Yin, or Ma Shangxi, they were truly obedient to him, and didn't have any thoughts of resistance. They truly regarded him as the heavens and the earth, a true god of the world. But blood-kindred Rizhao wasn't like that. This was undoubtedly the result of the difference in strength between them. Rizhao's cultivation was much higher than his, so even if he refined his blood, he still had some thoughts he shouldn't have. Of course, Lu Yi didn't dare to keep such a blood servant. At a critical moment, it could be fatal. As soon as he said this, blood-kindred Rizhao, who was so weak that he almost collapsed, became even more rebellious. He even looked at Lu Yi with a trace of hatred. Although it was quickly replaced by begging, it couldn't move Lu Yi at all. Xia Yingyue was also a decisive woman. She took a step forward and slapped blood-kindred Rizhao's head. His entire head was smashed into pieces. The headless corpse fell limply to the ground, blood gushing out. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin quickly stepped forward. One of them skillfully took out the sparkling blood crystal from blood-kindred Rizhao's body and put it away like a treasure. The other guided his blood, drawing out the drop of blood-kindred Rizhao's saint blood, and handed it to Lu Yi to deal with. In this battle, 3 blood-kindred Rizhao had fallen. Rizhao was even more difficult to calculate. It could be said that they had suffered a great loss. End of chapter. Chapter 1828. Southern Fengsuan Mountain, Pengyu Peak. This was the spiritual peak where Jade Clarity Tower was located. At this moment, the 3 divisions were gathered together. The invasion of the vampires could be considered a complete failure. Out of the 7 Rizhao that came, 3 of them died in battle, and the rest suffered heavy losses. After the battle, Chen Xianhai personally jumped out of the outer realm to investigate the situation. He found that there was no trace of the vampires around. It was obvious that the previous battle had made the vampires feel uneasy, so they fled far away after escaping from Mount Fangsuan. At present, the southern region was still traveling through the starry sky, under the guidance of the core. Even though it was still within the bloody extinction star system, there shouldn't be any further obstacles if nothing unexpected were to happen. Just in case, the cultivators from the east and west who had come to provide support didn't rush back. Instead, they chose to stay in the south and wait for the south to pass through the bloody extinction star system before returning. Of the 8 Rakagas, only Lu Yi was Yu Yao. He was incomparably eye-catching, but no one dared to underestimate him. Lu Yi had contributed the most in this battle. The deaths of the 3 blood race Rakagas were directly or indirectly related to him. Moreover, if he hadn't sealed the realm, who knew how many of the vampires would have fled when they sensed that something was amiss? He definitely wouldn't have let the other party pay such a heavy price. Originally, Rizhao of the Miniman race had reluctantly accepted the fact that Mount Fangsuan had another master. However, he still felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Even if Lu Yi was Su Yuqing's Dao companion, even if he was the successor of the Dao tree lineage. However, this battle had made them deeply realize the convenience of having a master of a domain. It could be said that as long as Lu Yi remained in the south, no matter how strong the enemy was, they would not be able to return alive. As they conversed, the southern and western tribes all spoke kindly of Lu Yi. Lu Yi politely responded. In terms of age, he was the youngest. In terms of cultivation, he was the lowest. Although he had managed to refine the core of Mount Fangsuan by chance, and became the master of Mount Fangsuan in name, he knew in his heart that the true master of Mount Fangsuan would always be the little human race. In the future, the Fangsuan mountain would become the backing of the 9 prefectures. Naturally, they would take this opportunity to build a good relationship with the Sunshine sect. During the exchange, someone asked about the core world. Lu Yi did not hide anything and told them everything. The group of Rizhao listened with great interest. The sound talisman suddenly vibrated. Lu Yi stopped talking and took it out to check. He frowned and stood up. Senior brothers and sisters, I'll take my leave first. There are some things I need to deal with. What is it? Xia Yinghua asked casually. Lu Yi explained. My 2 blood warriors captured Yu Yao from the blood race. Before coming here, I gave him a drop of my blood treasure to refine, hoping to get some information about Bloody Starless Star from him, just in case. Just now, he said he had a very important piece of information to pass on to me. It seems it has something to do with Bloody Starless Star. Yu Qinglu said. Since that's the case, let him come over and talk. What do you think, junior brother? All right. Lu Yi nodded and immediately took out a sound talisman to reply to Xiang Yin. Moments later, the Xiang Yin sisters brought the vampire, Yu Yao, into the main hall. Under the gazes of the crowd, the Xiang Yin sisters were still fine. After all, they had performed a meritorious service earlier. However, the vampire, Yu Yao, seemed to be under a lot of pressure. His position had changed too quickly. Just a few moments ago, he had been locked in a fierce battle with the dwarf race. But now, because he had become Lu Ye's blood warrior, he was standing on the same side. This was somewhat difficult for him to adapt to. But because he had refined the saint blood, there were some things he had to say. He also knew how much the dwarf race hated the blood race, so he naturally felt uneasy. What's your name? Lu Yi looked at his new blood warrior and asked. Reporting to High Lord. This one's name is Ding Bei Feng. The blood warrior replied respectfully. What do you want to say? Ding Bei Feng calmed himself down and said. High Lord, after losing this battle, Absolute Blood Realm will definitely not let this matter rest. The Sunshine Saint Venerables covet Minuscule Mountain very much. This is a rare opportunity, so they are determined to seize it. If it were an ordinary treasure, the blood race might not have any other intentions after suffering such a big loss. But this was Minuscule Mountain. The covetousness and desire for this treasure was engraved in the depths of the blood race's soul. It was a greed inherited from their blood ancestors. So no matter how great the loss was, No blood race member would give up. How many Sunshine Saints are there in Absolute Blood Realm? Lu Yi asked. Although the blood race had sent out 7 Sunshine Saints before, Lu Yi estimated that that was not the full strength of the blood race. There would definitely be some Sunshine Saints left to guard the realm. 9. Ding Beifeng replied. Wu Ji coldly snorted. Almost half of the 7 Sunshine Saints who came first were killed. Now you only have 6 Sunshine Saints left. What can you do? The key was that Lu Yi was here. With his identity as the Lord of Minuscule Mountain, and his powerful holiness, if another battle broke out, the South would not be as passive as before. If the blood race dared to invade, they would not be able to return alive. What's more, the human race had 8 Sunshine Saints. In terms of the highest combat strength, the human race was not at a disadvantage. It's not the same. We underestimated the enemy before. After this defeat, our realm will definitely use their ancestral artifact. Ancestral artifact? Lu Yi raised his brow. What ancestral artifact? What kind of power does this ancestral artifact have? Ding Beifeng shook his head. Only the Sunshine Saints can come into contact with the ancestral artifact. I have only heard of it, but have never seen it with my own eyes. I don't know how powerful the ancestral artifact is. However, there is a legend in our realm. It is said that many years ago, several powerful realms joined forces to attack our realm. At that time, more than 20 Sunshine Saints were sent. Even so, when the Sunshine Saints of our realm took out the ancestral artifact, they still fled in defeat. Lu Yi frowned as he listened. If he was not wrong, the ancestral artifact should be something left behind by the blood ancestor. It was hard to say how powerful this thing was. If the legend Ding Beifeng spoke of was true, then this ancestral artifact should not be underestimated. After all, more than 20 Sunshine Saints from several realms had failed to defeat the ancestral artifact. Every realm has their own legends. Legends are legends because they are exaggerated stories passed down from generation to generation. They may not be true, Wang Xiong from the west said. The Sunshine Saints nodded. Naturally, they understood this logic. It may not be just a legend. An old voice sounded. Everyone quickly looked at Yu Qinglu. The latter said, "This old man has also heard of this." Everyone was stunned. Yu Qinglu said slowly, "Haven't you been curious? The blood race is so notorious, and has enemies everywhere in the universe. Is there no one who wants to get rid of the blood race once and for all? Unlike the insectoids, the blood race isn't as mobile. The blood race's few foundational realms are traceable. Take the blood extinction world for example. It's in the blood extinction star system. If people work together, can't they destroy it?" Lu Yi could not help but fall into deep thought. In fact, he had thought about this before. The insect race could not be wiped out. That could not be helped. No one knew how many insect nests were floating in the universe, and how many insect race were hiding in the various realms, waiting to rise up. However, the blood race was different. One could find out where their foundation realms were with just a little investigation. There were many races and realms that hated the blood race. How could they continue to exist? When Lu Yi considered this before, he simply thought that it would be difficult to form an alliance, and that the price to pay for an expedition was too high. That was why no one did it. But now, it seemed that was not the case. Someone did it before, and it seemed to have happened more than once. However, without exception, they all failed. Among them, there was the shadow of the ancestral artifact. However, it happened so long ago that this old man only heard about it by chance. I don't know the specifics. Lu Yi suddenly regretted having Xia Yingyue kill the vampire Sunshine. If he had known this would happen, he would have gotten some information from him before killing him. However, the vampire Sunshine's submission to him was not complete, so there might not be much to gain from getting information from him. The ancestral artifact was the blood race's greatest secret. It was very likely that he would not mention it. Actually, there is no need to worry too much about this. If the vampire Sunshine dares to attack with the ancestral artifact, we can just attack him head-on. The ancestral artifact may be extraordinary, but Minuscule Mountain is also a treasure. It is not inferior to it. Chen Xianhai said in a low voice. The Ryas nodded. However, there is one thing we need to pay attention to. Zhang Kuan turned to Yu Qinglu. Senior brother Yu, have you calculated the path of the minuscule mountain? Did you avoid the absolute blood world? Yu Qinglu said, we calculated when we entered the absolute blood star system. According to the marks on the star chart, the path of the minuscule mountain should not be too close to the absolute blood world. It should be more than 10 days away from the absolute blood world. Zhang Kuan nodded. Then there is nothing to worry about. We only need to guard the headquarters and kill the enemies if they come. Once the headquarters safely enters the absolute blood star system, it will be fine. The blood race was interested in the minuscule mountain, but the Miniman tribe had no interest in the absolute blood world. The absolute blood star system was only a part of the long journey. If the blood race had not discovered the peculiarity of the minuscule mountain and came to investigate, exposing the existence of the minuscule mountain, the previous battle would not have happened. The entire minuscule mountain would have quietly passed through the absolute blood star system and left. The previous battle had caused the blood race to suffer heavy losses. Therefore, even if the blood race really did have the ancestral artifact, the Miniman tribe could rest easy as long as they hid in the absolute blood star system. After the meeting ended, everyone dispersed. Lu Yi and the two Rizhao from the east were arranged to live on Pengyu Peak. After the battle, they each recuperated. Several days passed peacefully, until a loud noise suddenly resounded through the absolute blood star system, and the entire world began to shake. Lu Yi, who was condensing his own treasure blood, was startled and quickly spread out his divine sense to sense the surroundings. The next moment, powerful auras appeared. They were undoubtedly the Rizhao from the Miniman tribe. They flew up from different positions, and like Lu Yi, spread out their divine sense to investigate. Lu Ye's face sank. Unlike the Rizhao's investigation, as the origin master, he could clearly feel some changes in the absolute blood star system. Originally, the southern minuscule mountain was rapidly moving through the starry sky. But at this moment, Lu Yi felt that the entire world seemed to have encountered a strange resistance. Under this resistance, the southern minuscule mountain was rapidly slowing down. It was because of the sudden appearance of this resistance that caused the absolute blood star system to shake. End of this chapter. Chapter 1829. In the southern Fangsun mountain, there was a sudden change. Rizhao and the others all investigated, and Lu Yi was the first to sense it. What made him feel strange was that he clearly sensed that at this moment, the southern Fangsun mountain seemed to have encountered a strong resistance. Because of the core, its speed in the starry sky was rapidly decreasing under the effect of this resistance. But where did this resistance come from? His mind drifted out, and his grand vision spied outside the domain. This was a convenience only the master of the domain could have. Otherwise, even someone like Chen Xianhai would have to jump out to investigate the situation outside the domain. Soon, Lu Ye's mind was attracted by the scene in front of him. In front of the headquarters of Fangsun Mountain, there was a huge mountain. This mountain was strange, with a total of 6 spirit peaks of different heights. The one in the middle was the highest, and its height decreased in descending order. Above the 6 majestic spirit peaks, there was a faint bloody light, seeping out a dark red color. Taking a closer look, the mountain with 6 spirit peaks was like a giant hand that held up the sky towards Fangsun Mountain. The 6 spirit peaks that towered into the heavens were the 6 fingers of the giant hand. Behind the towering mountain that looked like a giant hand, there was a slightly curved, roughly crescent-shaped, huge piece of land. A strong aura of the domain came rushing over. Lu Yi instantly understood what this was. One of the foundation domains of the blood race, the blood extinction domain. This domain was formed from a part of the blood ancestor's body after his death. The blood extinction domain was a torso without limbs and a head, while the blood extinction domain was an arm, which was why it had such a strange shape. But the situation was a little strange. Lu Yi transmitted to Yu Qinglu, "Senior brother, are you sure that the blood extinction domain is not on the path of the headquarters?" During the meeting a few days ago, Chen Xianhai had mentioned this matter. At that time, The answer given by Yu Qinglu was that according to their calculations, the route of the headquarters of Fangsuan Mountain would be more than 10 days away from the blood extinction domain. This was obviously inconsistent with what Lu Yi saw at this moment. Yu Qinglu quickly replied, confirming that the previous calculations were correct. Lu Yi composed himself and said, "Senior brother, the blood extinction domain is in front of the headquarters of Fangsuan Mountain, blocking the path of the headquarters. The changes in the headquarters are related to this domain." "How?" Yu Qinglu was surprised, and then said, "This old man will go take a look." As he spoke, he leaped up. Lu Yi warned, "Senior martial brother, be careful." Although he didn't feel much threat from the blood extinction world for the time being, and he didn't even see the figures of the blood race cultivators, the situation was strange, and he still had to be prepared. Yu Qinglu quickly jumped out of the bounded domain to investigate the situation. When he saw the situation in front of him, he couldn't help but be stunned. After a while, he returned and told Rizhao what he had seen. Rizhao was shocked. In the telepathic thoughts, Rizhao and the others were communicating. Yu Qinglu said, "Our calculations can't be wrong, but now the blood absolute world is blocking our way, and the entire blood absolute world is filled with a strange repulsive force, hindering our advance." Chen Xianhai said, "If the impossible happened, then there is only one explanation." Wang Xiong continued, "The blood absolute world has shifted from its original position to here." This was also what the other Rizhao were thinking. Otherwise, there was no way to explain the current situation. However, how difficult was it to shift a bounded domain? Even if the blood absolute world really had a ruler, it wouldn't be easy to do such a thing, let alone in such a short period of time. The blood absolute world most likely didn't have a ruler. In order to give birth to a ruler, the bounded domain must first have an origin consciousness. The blood absolute world was a part of the blood progenitor's body. If it really had an origin consciousness, it would be the remnant of the blood progenitor's consciousness. Just like back in the inner world, the drop of treasure blood had given birth to a consciousness. It could be considered an extension of the blood progenitor's consciousness. Since there was no ruler of the bounded domain, but the bounded domain had still shifted by a large margin, it couldn't help but remind the Rizhao of what they had heard a few days ago. The power of the ancestral artifact? Someone guessed. Apart from the mysterious ancestral artifact, no one could think of how the blood race could do such a thing. Lu Yi also thought of this point, and immediately asked Ding Beifeng, "Has the blood absolute world ever been shifted? Does the ancestral artifact have the power to shift the blood absolute world?" Ding Beifeng replied blankly, "I don't know." Lu Yi knew that he couldn't count on him. This guy didn't even know what the ancestral artifact was, so how could he know anything else? According to him, only Rizhao and the Holy Sage had the right to come into contact with the ancestral artifact. Lu Yi even suspected that not every blood race member could come into contact with it. It was very likely that the ancestral artifact was in the hands of the strongest blood race member in the blood absolute world. "Junior brother Lu, the division's progress is blocked. Do you have any good ideas?" Xia Yinghua asked through voice transmission. Even someone as strong as Rizhao couldn't interfere in this matter. Only the ruler of the bounded domain, Lu Yi, might be able to do something. Lu Yi pondered for a moment, then said, "I can use the power of the bounded domain to resist. If we can break down the obstruction, the path ahead will be smooth." The ancestral artifact's might was unknown. Neither Lu Yi nor Rizhao wanted the division to be blocked in this part of the starry sky. For the time being, the blood race didn't seem to be doing anything. But if they really did leave the division behind, no one could say for sure what the consequences would be. Thus, it was best to leave this place as soon as possible. "Then let's give it a try," Yu Qinglu said in a low voice. Lu Yi nodded and immediately immersed himself in mobilizing the bounded domain's resources to resist the strange power coming from the blood absolute world. The effect was very obvious. The division's speed, which had been gradually slowing down, picked up again. But good times didn't last long. As if sensing the change in the division, the strange power coming from the blood absolute world suddenly became much stronger. This caused the division's speed to drop again, and there were even signs of it stopping. Lu Yi could only increase the mobilization of bounded domain's power. This tug and struggle continued for a while. When the two bounded domains approached a certain distance, Lu Yi suddenly found that the entire blood absolute world was actually retreating. It seemed to be maintaining a distance from the division's Fengsuan mountain, while preventing the division from moving forward. Lu Yi couldn't help but frown. Senior brothers, the situation isn't good. This kind of resistance is seriously exhausting our bounded domain's resources. Moreover, the other party can also mobilize bounded domain's power. In the process of resisting the blood absolute world, Lu Yi had already seen through the essence of the strange power. It was the bounded domain's resources. This had become a battle of the two great bounded domain's resources. It could be said that it was a battle of self-destruction. If they couldn't completely get rid of the blood absolute world, then this kind of battle would continue. Sooner or later, the entire Fengsuan Mountain's resources would be exhausted. Of course, the blood absolute world wouldn't have a good end either. But this kind of result was absolutely unacceptable to the Xiaoman race. Yu Qingluo's voice sounded. If they want to stop, then let them. Junior brother, let the division stop. Lu Yi gave up on mobilizing bounded domain's power. The next moment, the entire southern Fengsuan mountain shook violently and suddenly stopped in the starry sky. The blood absolute world, which had been constantly retreating, sensed this and slowly came to a stop. Junior brother Lu, you take charge of the division and act according to the situation. The other junior brothers and junior sisters, follow this old man out to fight the enemy. Yu Qinglu ordered, and took the lead to fly out. Since they couldn't compete based on bounded domain's resources, then they would directly determine the winner from the cultivator level. The Xiaoman race had 8 sunshine, while the blood race only had 6. In terms of numbers, the Xiaoman race had more. And no matter what the ancestral artifact was, there must be a sunshine of the blood race activating it. In other words, if they went out now, they would definitely have the advantage. If they could restrain the sunshine of the blood race and prevent them from activating the ancestral artifact, Lu Ye's side could find an opportunity to break through the blood absolute world's seal and leave directly. This was Yu Qingluo's plan. In the blink of an eye, the 8 sunshine left the bounded domain and turned into 8 streams of light, rapidly approaching the blood absolute world. Yu Qinglu transmitted his voice everywhere. Don't enter the bounded domain, only attack outside. Regardless of whether there was a realm master on the other side, they could still mobilize bounded domain's power. So, rashly entering the bounded domain was a suicidal approach. Just like when the blood race invaded Fengsuan Mountain, once the bounded domain was sealed, they would be beaten up. Only attacking outside and creating chaos could create an opportunity for Lu Ye's side. The sunshine received the order, and all of them activated their magic power, ready to attack. But at this moment, the bloody light that had been lingering on the giant hand suddenly became incomparably bright. The 8 sunshine of the hominin clan all felt a chill all over their bodies at the same time, and a feeling of extreme danger lingered in their hearts. Be careful, Chen Xianhai shouted. Without thinking, he immediately took out a defensive red talisman. Not only him, but Yu Qinglu also took out a defensive red talisman at the same time. The others all activated their own methods to protect themselves. The next moment, a loud sound rang out from the depths of their hearts. Under everyone's gaze, the giant hand shook violently. Then, a bright bloody light was reflected from the giant hand, turning into an incomparably huge bloody palm print that could cover the sky and push towards the 8 sunshine of the hominin clan. This scene was extremely shocking. It was as if a giant had slapped the 8 sunshine of the hominin clan. Under this palm, the 8 sunshine of the hominin clan were as small as ants. Angry roars rang out, and the sunshine of the sunshine tried their best to resist. The 2 defensive red talismans were the first to break, and then the 8 figures were like 8 kites. The moment they were hit by the bloody palm print, they were sent flying high into the air, all of them dripping with blood. Go! Yu Qingluo's face was pale, and he shouted. The 8 figures returned as quickly as they left. In the headquarters of the Fengsuan Mountain, Lu Yi, who was watching this scene from afar, was shocked. He finally knew why many years ago, when several major realms joined forces and sent out more than 20 sunshine, they still couldn't take down the absolute blood world. With such a terrifying attack, not to mention 20 sunshine, even 50 sunshine couldn't do it. The blood race could use the power of the ancestral artifact to move the absolute blood world, and even use the power of the ancestral artifact as the source of power of the absolute blood world to launch such a terrifying attack. As long as the ancestral artifact was not lost, the absolute blood world would never be taken down. In contrast, what he could do as the Lord of the Realm was very limited. It was limited to within the realm, and there was no way he could spread the realm's foundation outside the realm. End of chapter. Chapter 1830. When Yu Qinglu and the others returned, they were all injured. Fortunately, their injuries were not serious. Fortunately, they had taken out 2 defensive red talismans when they saw the situation was bad. Otherwise, even if the 8 of them joined forces, they would not have been able to avoid serious injuries in the face of that terrifying attack. This confrontation made the little human tribe fully aware of the strength of the Blood Absolute World. In the previous battle, the Blood Absolute World had suffered heavy losses, and even 3 Rizhao had died. This inevitably gave rise to the idea that the Blood Absolute World was not so simple. But now they knew that a world that could survive under the hatred of so many races was not as simple as it seemed. In order to take down the Heart-Inch Mountain, the Blood Absolute World could be said to have done their best. The current situation was a little awkward for the little human tribe. The headquarters of the Heart-Inch Mountain had been forced to stop here. Although there were many Rizhao gathered here, they could not kill their way into the Blood Absolute World. Even approaching was dangerous. How could they escape? Moreover, Lu Yi faintly felt that the Blood Absolute World's methods were not limited to this. Their goal was to take down the Heart-Inch Mountain in the south. Just forcing the Heart-Inch Mountain to stop was meaningless, so there must be a backup plan. The backup plan of the blood race came quickly. Less than an hour after Yu Qinglu and the other Rizhao returned to the Heart-Inch Mountain, Lu Yi, who had been observing the situation outside, discovered the changes in the Blood Absolute World. On the giant hand, a rich blood color bloomed, and then an illusory giant hand slowly took shape. The giant hand was vivid and lifelike, like the shape of 6 mountains. It had 6 fingers, and the fingernails on the fingertips were sharp and slender, like 6 sharp blades. This illusory giant hand stretched out from the Blood Absolute World and grabbed at the Heart-Inch Mountain in the south. Soon after, the entire Heart-Inch Mountain was in the palm of its hand. Lu Yi immediately sensed a strange force invading from outside the world. He immediately mobilized the foundation of the world to resist. At this moment, he finally understood the intentions of the Blood Extinction World. The other party wanted to use this method to deplete the Fengsuan Mountain's foundation. Once the Fengsuan Mountain's foundation was depleted to a certain extent, the blood race's power would be able to invade the world and affect all the humans living here. If the Heart-Inch Mountain lost its foundation, then the role he could play as the master of the world would become very limited. At that time, the Blood Absolute World's ancestral weapons would be very difficult to resist in the south. Realizing this, Lu Yi hurriedly passed on the information to the other Rizhao, thinking of countermeasures. In the current situation, the southern Fengsuan Mountain could not escape, because the Blood Absolute World could also move. It was like a dogskin plaster that maintained a certain distance from the southern side. There was no way to escape, and there was no way to attack. The outcome of the previous 8 Rikagas was already obvious. The power of the ancestral artifact of the vampires was truly terrifying. Lu Yi could only continue to mobilize the realm's resources to resist the blood race's invasion. It wouldn't matter in the short term, but this kind of temporary solution was destined to not last long. A few days later, Rizhao was still at a loss. They used to be able to think of a solution, even if they encountered a difficult situation. But this time, they really couldn't think of a good solution. He couldn't avoid it, and he couldn't fight it either. It was really worrying. Lu Yi came to Su Yuqing's sleeping quarters and told her some of his thoughts. Su Yuqing immediately shook her head. No, it's too dangerous. Lu Yi had just said that he wanted to infiltrate the blood absolute world. How could she agree to this? Previously, the 8 of them had worked together to preserve their lives under that terrifying attack. Even so, they had still been injured. If Lu Yi and Yu Yao were to be hit by that attack, they would undoubtedly die. Let me finish. Lu Yi grabbed her hand and gently rubbed it as he said, when I was in the Kingdom of the 9 States, I once entered the blood absolute world. At the time, I discovered that I could mobilize the entire blood absolute world, but it was too difficult, so I didn't try. Later I thought about it. The blood refinement realm is the blood ancestor's remnant body. I refine the blood ancestor's precious blood, so I have a part of her power. That's why I can use her power to move her remnant body. The blood extinction realm is also the blood ancestor's remnant body. Logically speaking, I should be able to move it. If that's the case, I only need to stir up a storm in the blood refinement realm. No matter what the blood race's deployment there is, it will be disrupted. In the past few days, he had been thinking about this matter and observing the situation in the blood absolute world. He could vaguely feel that there was a strange connection between him and the blood absolute world. But because of the distance, this connection was very weak. This was why he had come up with this idea. The blood race was currently hiding in the blood absolute world, and Rizhao was definitely urging the power of the ancestral artifact. This kind of thing couldn't be easily disturbed. If Lu Yi went to stir up a storm, it would be a fatal blow to the blood race. What if your idea is wrong? Su Yuqing still shook her head. Lu Yi said, whether it's right or wrong, I only need to get closer to the blood absolute world to know. The closer I am, the more obvious that feeling will be. If I'm wrong, I'll immediately return. Su Yuqing didn't say anything. Lu Yi said, I know you're worried, but the current situation can't be resolved except from within the blood race. The blood race's power is currently corroding our world. There's no need to worry about it in the short term, but it will consume our world's resources. Once things reach a point of no return, our world will have no other choice but to give up on Mount Minuscule in the south. The lesser race has waited for so many years, and now they finally have a chance to unify the blood race. I don't think anyone will be willing to give it up. But it's too dangerous. Su Yuqing was deeply worried. I already felt uneasy when I let you take the risk of going to the illusory blood demon eye. Now that you're going to the blood absolute world, there's no reason for you to take all the risks for our race. Lu Yi smiled. I may be a human, but I'm also the master of Mount Minuscule. Can't I take the lead in this matter? He gently patted the back of her hand. Don't worry. I'm good at disguising myself as a blood race member. Moreover, I won't be going alone. Su Yuqing was puzzled. Who are you taking with you? Beifeng. Lu Yi increasingly felt that it was a wise decision for the Xiang sisters to capture Beifeng alive. Otherwise, he would have to go through a lot of trouble to sneak into the blood absolute world. Also, I'll leave a clone here. If there's any movement on the main body's side, the clone will be able to sense it, Lu Yi added. Precious blood clone? Su Yuqing asked. Lu Yi shook his head and condensed a talent tree avatar in front of her. The reason why he condensed a talent tree avatar was naturally because their connection was closer. Moreover, after his original body left, he would need the talent tree avatar to guard this realm and mobilize the foundation of this realm to resist the invasion of the vampires. Your doppelganger technique is truly profound. Su Yuqing looked at the main body and then at the clone. If she saw it at first glance, she really wouldn't be able to tell. The main body took out a set of clothes and was about to throw it to the clone. But Su Yuqing took it and personally put it on the clone. Behave yourself. Su Yuqing lowered her head, patted the doppelganger's big hand and said, remember what you said. If things are not as you said, return immediately. Our clan's 8 Rizhao are here. There will be a way. Got it. The main body nodded. After I leave, you can tell the other senior brothers. When to make a move, the clone will inform you. A moment later, the main body quietly left Fengsun Mountain with Beifeng and swept into the depths of the starry sky. In order to avoid being exposed, the The master and servant didn't go in the direction of the blood absolute world. Instead, they went in a direction far away from this world. It wasn't until a few days later that the master and servant took a big detour and rushed in the direction of the blood absolute world. Beifeng controlled the bloody light and wrapped himself in Lu Yi. Originally, Lu Yi was wondering if he should use the thousand-faced spirit runes to change his appearance and disguise himself as a blood race member. This way, he could avoid the risk of being exposed. However, after talking with Beifeng, Lu Yi knew that there was no need to go through so much trouble, because there were humans in the blood absolute world. The blood absolute world wasn't the only world in the entire blood absolute star system. There were dozens of other worlds of various sizes. These worlds had different races living in them, and they were all subordinate to the blood race. They could become the blood race's food at any time. In such a big environment, there were also creatures of various races living in the blood absolute world. Naturally, there were many humans. However, cultivation was a problem, because the blood race had strict control over their food. Basically, they wouldn't let their food's cultivation grow too high. Constellation was the limit. They definitely wouldn't give birth to a Yu Yao. Therefore, Lu Yi only used the thousand-faced spirit runes to change his appearance slightly. He also used the pseudo-prestige spirit runes to disguise his strength to the constellation level. If he followed Beifeng like this, even if the other blood race members saw him, they would only think that he was Beifeng's food. Because they had taken a big detour, the master and servant approached the blood absolute world from another direction. Lu Yi carefully sensed. As he got closer, he became more and more sure that his guess was right. He had a similar connection with the blood absolute world as he did with the blood refined world. In other words, he should be able to mobilize the blood absolute world. This kind of mobilization wasn't done by the master of the world. It was done because he had refined the power of the blood ancestor and used it to mobilize the blood ancestor's remnant body. It was similar to how the blood absolute world relied on the power of the ancestral artifact to mobilize the world's foundation. In Lu Ye's opinion, the blood absolute world was much smaller than the blood refined world. After all, one was only an arm, while the other was an entire torso. There was naturally a big difference in size. It was difficult for him to mobilize the blood refined world, but it didn't mean that he couldn't mobilize the blood absolute world. Things were getting easier. There were no twists and turns in entering the blood absolute world. The characteristics of Beifeng's blood race were too obvious. So even if the blood race cultivators sensed him approaching, they didn't stop him. Following behind Beifeng, Lu Yi felt that the foundation of the blood absolute world was indeed very strong. It was far from what the blood refined world could compare to. However, the barrenness of the blood refined world should be related to that ancient seal. Otherwise, the blood race would have one more foundational realm. End of chapter. Chapter 1831. Outside the blood absolute world, there were not many things that could be seen. But inside the blood absolute world, Lu Yi immediately discovered many anomalies. He looked up and saw streaks of bloody light rising from all over the blood extinction realm. They were like pillars of blood that connected the heavens and the earth. There were thousands of such pillars in the blood extinction realm. It was a spectacular sight to behold from afar. The master and servant had entered from the center of the blood extinction realm. The nearest blood pillar was only a few dozen kilometers away. Lu Yi focused his gaze, hoping to find the source of the blood pillar. If he wasn't mistaken, these abnormal scenes must be related to the blood race's use of the ancestral artifact. But Lu Yi didn't understand what the ancestral artifact was, and why it could cause such strange phenomena in the realm of absolute blood when it was activated. Soon, Lu Yi saw the source of the blood pillar. To his surprise, it was a blood pond. Blood pools existed in the blood refinement realm, and there were quite a few of them. That was why the ambitious vampires could choose the nearest blood pool to cultivate in. Of course, most of the vampires who did so died in there. The blood extinction realm naturally had blood ponds as well. However, at this moment, the blood pond seemed to be boiling. Dense bloody light surged out of it and soared into the sky, forming the blood pillar Lu Yi saw. Lu Yi understood that the source of the other blood pillars should be the blood pools. What infuriated him was that at this very moment, a large number of living beings were being brought to the side of the blood pool by the blood clan from all directions. The blood clan completely ignored the cries and pleas of these living beings and threw them all into the blood pool. The blood ponds were like man-eating beasts. Any living being thrown into them would at most float a few times before disappearing without a trace. Has something like this happened before? Lu Yi asked through voice transmission. I've never seen anything like this before. Beifeng shook his head. This was the first time he had seen such a scene. There were countless blood feasts in the blood extinction boundary. However, with his divine thought, he could tell that almost all of them had disappeared. Their fates could be imagined. Beifeng's expression changed. It was at this moment that Yu Yao's aura rapidly approached. The master and servant turned to look and saw a blood race descending. She glanced at Beifeng in surprise. You're still alive? Northern Wind sneered. Aren't you still alive? From the way they spoke, Lu Yi guessed that the relationship between Beifeng and Yu Yao was not too good. Previously, when the blood race army invaded Mount Fengsuan in the south, the blood race had suffered heavy losses. Some of the quick-witted ones managed to escape, while the slower ones were left behind in Mount Fengsuan. A few of the blood breeds were fast and had returned to the blood extinction world early. However, there were still many blood breeds who had not returned in time. This was also the reason why the blood race did not become suspicious when Ding Beifeng brought Lu Yi into the blood extinction world. It was because the scattered blood race members were returning one after another. If you're not dead, then hurry up and move. What are you spacing out for? Yu Yao of the blood race scolded impatiently. Beifeng frowned. What are they doing? The blood tribe member, Yu Yao, left in a flash, as if she couldn't be bothered with Ding Beifeng. If it were in the past, Ding Beifeng would definitely not have done anything unnecessary. After all, it wasn't just a day or two that everyone disliked each other. It had been like this for so many years. However, as Lu Ye's blood servant, he knew that Lu Yi urgently wanted to understand some information about the blood extinction world. Naturally, he couldn't let the other party leave just like that. He immediately activated his holy attribute and looked at the other party coldly. Yu Yao was first stunned, then shocked. She looked at Ding Beifeng in fear. When did you refine the holy blood? Impudent. Beifeng snorted. Yu Yao's face alternated between green and red. Although she was unwilling, she still bowed respectfully. Greetings, holy senior. Those who could refine sage blood were holy sovereigns. No matter how hard Yu Yao thought about it, she couldn't understand where Ding Beifeng had gotten his hands on sage blood. Moreover, he had actually managed to refine it. With this, the gap between their statuses had been pulled apart. Unless she also refined a drop of sage blood, she would forever be inferior to Ding Beifeng. Her heart was filled with jealousy, unwillingness, and helplessness. Tell me, Ding Beifeng said indifferently. This time, Yu Yao no longer dared to show any displeasure. She immediately explained the whole story. After the vampires returned, they began to activate the ancestral artifact's power together, throwing all the blood in the realm of absolute blood into the blood pool as a blood sacrifice. This was one of the rituals. Now all the blood tribe members in the blood extinction world were busy with this. In just a few days, who knew how much blood had been sacrificed? After Yu Yao finished speaking, she looked at Ding Beifeng cautiously. Although she knew that her life wouldn't be in danger, even if she didn't get along with Ding Beifeng. If Ding Beifeng wanted to humiliate her, she wouldn't be able to resist. Fortunately, Ding Beifeng didn't have such thoughts. He just waved his hand and said, "Scram." Yu Yao felt as if she had been pardoned. She cupped her fists and turned into a streak of bloody light before flying away. Ding Beifeng looked at Lu Yi. Lu Yi was currently staring in a certain direction. If the entire blood extinction world was an arm, then that direction would be the wrist. Lu Yi could sense that the blood tribe members were gathered there. Moreover, that was the place where the energy fluctuations were the most chaotic in the entire blood extinction world. If he wasn't mistaken, that was where the so-called ancestral artifact was located. Lu Yi really wanted to know what the ancestral artifact was. But he also knew that now wasn't the time to inquire about it. His purpose here was to stir up a storm and ruin the Blood Tribe's plans. His most basic goal was to free Mount Fongsuan in the south from the blood extinction world and leave this galaxy. If possible, he could make further progress on this foundation. Of course, this would depend on the circumstances. Retracting his gaze, Lu Yi ordered, "Throw me into the blood pool." "Yes," Ding Beifeng replied. He stepped forward and grabbed Lu Yi's collar. Lu Yi immediately put up a furious struggle. According to his previous experiments in the blood extinction world, if he wanted to mobilize the entire world, he would have to go deep into the blood pool. At first, he was still thinking about how to do this without anyone noticing. Unexpectedly, the entire blood extinction world was undergoing a blood sacrifice ceremony. This undoubtedly made things easier for him. Ding Beifeng's face was cold. He ignored Lu Yi's struggles and brought him to the nearest blood pool. Under the gazes of many vampires, he threw Lu Yi in. Lu Yi's figure floated up and down in the blood pool for a moment, before disappearing without a trace. Lu Yi went deeper into the blood pool, where the internal passages extended in all directions. The underground passages were undoubtedly the blood vessels of the blood progenitor. Now that he had entered without a hitch, Lu Yi was troubled. Back in the blood extinction world, he had entered the blood progenitor's heart. This position was undoubtedly a vital point for any living being. Mobilizing from such a position would undoubtedly yield twice the results with half the effort. The blood extinction world was formed from one of the blood progenitor's arms, so there was no vital point to speak of. After some thought, Lu Yi suddenly had a flash of inspiration. There really wasn't any vital point on the arm, but there were spirit cavities on the arm. Those spirit cavities were undoubtedly the points where energy gathered. In the end, however, the blood progenitor wasn't a human. He didn't know how her spirit cavities differed from those of the human race, so he could only carefully search for them. The blood pool Lu Yi had entered was very close to the elbow. To a human, this was a very crucial spirit cavern, and it was also a place where one's blood energy converged. After searching for a while, Lu Yi found a location that matched the characteristics of this place. This place was different from the other places that Lu Yi had passed through before. If the other passages were just a straight road, then this location was a crossroad. Of course, this location was more complicated than a crossroad. It was the intersection of many passages. If he wasn't mistaken, this should be one of the blood progenitor's spirit cavities. From this, it seemed that the blood progenitor's spirit cavities were connected to the human race. Lu Yi immediately settled down and immersed his mind. The connection with the blood extinction world gradually grew closer, and Lu Yi once again felt as though he was wearing a layer of heavy armor. He had experienced this feeling back in the blood extinction world, but the blood extinction world was simply too big. The heavy armor on his body made it difficult for him to move, so he couldn't mobilize the blood extinction world. In comparison, although it was still heavy, it was undoubtedly much better than when he was in the blood extinction world. This confirmed his previous conjecture. The blood extinction world was much smaller than the blood extinction world, so it would be much easier for him to mobilize it. As time passed, the connection grew closer and closer, and Lu Yi's mind also began to sublimate. Until a certain moment, when this wondrous connection reached its limit, Lu Yi suddenly felt like the entire domain was under his control. With a single thought, everything within the domain was imprinted into his mind. He saw countless members of the blood race flying around busily. He heard the screams and curses of many blood feasts. He felt the throbbing of the entire world of blood extinction. This arm that had lost its vitality for many years seemed to be coming back to life. However, at this moment, the foundation of the world of blood extinction was rapidly draining away. It was being led by a certain force and was leaking outwards. Following the source of this force, Lu Yi observed it carefully. He finally saw the ancestral artifact. At the wrist, there was a valley, and at the center of the valley was a 300-meter-tall altar. On top of the altar was a 10-meter-long bronze pestle. At first glance, there wasn't anything unusual about this pestle, but it gave off an extremely simple feeling. It was obviously quite old, and its surface was mottled with bronze, and many of its profound patterns were missing. Around the altar, many blood race powerhouses gathered, each of them urging their strength to pour it into the bronze pestle, causing the altar to tremble incessantly. Lu Ye's mind drifted here without alarming any of the blood race members. This method of observation was absolutely grand, so even someone as strong as Ri Guang couldn't detect anything. End of chapter. Chapter 1832. If he wasn't mistaken, that bronze pestle should be the blood race's ancestral artifact, something left behind by the blood ancestor. This was why the blood race's Rikishiras could control the foundation of the world of absolute blood and control the southern minuscule mountain. However, no matter how Lu Yi looked at it, he couldn't see anything special about this pestle. It was only a few dozen meters long, while the blood ancestor was a colossus. A single strand of hair was tens of thousands of times longer than this thing. Why would she need something like this? He couldn't help but guess that this thing wasn't as simple as it looked. Many treasures in this world had the ability to change their size. Perhaps this pestle could be transformed to match the blood ancestor's body size. Lu Yi finally understood why the blood race had thrown so many blood sacrifices into the blood pool. It was because the blood vitality of these blood sacrifices could greatly reduce the consumption of the realm's foundation. If not for the situation, Lu Yi suspected that the world of absolute blood would have transferred a large number of blood sacrifices from other realms. However, the current situation made it impossible for the world of absolute blood to do so. Having ascertained everything, Lu Yi immediately prepared to take action. Every moment of delay would consume more of the foundation of the southern minuscule mountain, so the sooner it was over the better. However, Lu Yi wasn't sure if things would progress as he expected, so he could only give it a try. Retracting his wandering thoughts, Lu Yi tried to mobilize the world of absolute blood. In an instant, just like what had happened in the world of blood, the entire realm began to shake. Mountains collapsed, rivers flowed in reverse, and the weather changed. Inside the realm, some people lost their footing and fell to the ground. There were even some blood race flying in the air, who couldn't control themselves and fell to the ground. The altar in the valley was even more turbulent, and the 6 blood race Rikishiras gathered around it all paled. Someone cried out in alarm. "What's going on?" No one could give an answer. The other Rikishiras all wore solemn expressions. Their divine senses surged as they borrowed the strength of their blood race bloodline to strengthen their connection with the ancestral artifact. Each of the Rikishiras could clearly feel an inexplicably powerful resistance in the realm. This resistance seemed to be preventing them from mobilizing the foundation of their realm. In a moment of carelessness, their previous efforts had almost been in vain. Fortunately, this resistance was slowly being resisted as their own strength and their connection with the ancestral artifact deepened. Lu Yi felt the pressure. It was already very difficult to mobilize the entire domain by himself. If there were no other factors, there was a high probability that he could mobilize the world of absolute blood. Of course, it was hard to say how long he could maintain it. It could be a few breaths or a dozen breaths. It definitely wouldn't be too long. After all, the heavy armor that was the world of absolute blood gave him too much pressure. However, the situation in the world of absolute blood was completely different from that in the blood refining world. Here, there were 6 Rizhao activating the power of the ancestral artifact. In this situation, it was equivalent to both sides using the entire world of absolute blood as a battlefield. Whoever exerted the most power would be able to gain some control over the world of absolute blood. As Lu Yi continued to exert his power, the turbulence in the realm became more and more violent. The 6 Nicho of the Blood Clan did not dare to be careless, and continued to exert their power. Suddenly, Ri Zhao of the Blood Clan exclaimed in surprise, "Our ancestors' power is recovering." He clearly thought that the power that was fighting against them came from the blood ancestor. He couldn't be blamed for having such a misunderstanding. Anyone in such a situation would have made similar inferences. Moreover, his inference was fundamentally correct. This was because Lu Ye's ability to mobilize the world of absolute blood did indeed come from the blood ancestor. It was an ability that came with refining the precious blood of the Blood Clan. Normally, this would definitely be news that would cause the entire blood clan to celebrate. The revival of their ancestors' power would undoubtedly bring great benefits to the entire clan. However, this was not the time. They were currently mobilizing the world of Absolute Blood's foundation, intending to encroach on Minuscule Mountain. Now that their ancestors' power had suddenly recovered and was fighting against them for control of the world of Absolute Blood, they inexplicably felt as if their ancestor had jumped out of his coffin and stabbed them in the back. Thus, after their joy, the Nicho of the Blood clan were very depressed. At this moment, they only had two choices. The first was to give up control of the world of Absolute Blood and allow their ancestors' power to continue recovering. Perhaps this would cause the entire world of Absolute Blood to undergo a miraculous change. However, if they did that, Minuscule Mountain would definitely run away. The second choice was to resist their ancestors' power and take Minuscule Mountain first. After a short moment of hesitation, the Nicho of the Blood clan had already reached a consensus. Take Minuscule Mountain first. If they missed this opportunity, they would not have another one in the future. Relatively speaking, since their ancestors' power was showing signs of recovery, this would not be the only time. There would be more opportunities in the future. As a result, Lu Yi felt more and more pressure. The most obvious sign was that the turbulence in the world of Absolute Blood was slowly calming down. After realizing this, Lu Yi simply gave up on mobilizing the world of Absolute Blood. He could not go on like this. He was alone, and his cultivation level was only at the middle stage of the Moon Jade realm. He was facing 6 Nicho of the Blood clan, and he had the ancestral artifact to borrow power from. He was indeed no match for them. However, he could not find any helpers for this kind of matter. He could only rely on himself to solve it. For a moment, Lu Yi was in a difficult position. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind. Previously, when he was in the world of Absolute Blood, he had wondered if he could mobilize the world of Absolute Blood, if he had enough blood clones. This was because the difficulty of exerting force from one point was different from exerting force from several points at once. However, although he had this idea at that time, he did not continue to try it. Even if he did succeed, it would not be of any practical use. Perhaps at this time, he could try to see if his idea was correct. With this thought in mind, Lu Yi immediately condensed his blood clones. In the blink of an eye, 7 blood clones lingered around and quickly spread out, following the underground blood river towards the possible locations of nodes. Before refining the blood ancestors' blood, Lu Yi could store up to 5 drops of blood. No matter how much he condensed, he could not produce more blood. However, after refining the blood ancestors' blood, this limit had increased to 9 drops. Lu Yi did not know why such a change had occurred, but he felt that it should be related to the change in his divine nature. Out of the 9 drops of blood ancestors' blood, 2 had been consumed, so there were only 7 drops left. However, at the same time, with 7 clones, plus the main body and the talent tree clones, the burden on Lu Ye's mind was also very great. Unlike before, when he could perfectly form a formation with his 5 blood clones, if he were to form a formation with his 9 blood clones, it would not be so harmonious. This was because each blood clone needed to be controlled. Lu Yi could not change this situation for the time being. He was afraid that he would have to wait until he was promoted to Sunshine to improve. Although controlling so many blood clones at the same time could not be achieved to the extent of perfect control, at the moment, he was not competing with others. He was simply looking for suitable positions, so the problem was not big. Time passed, and the precious blood clones slowly found a suitable place to settle down. After a few days, the 7 blood clones were finally settled down. In the conference hall of Mount Fengsuan in the south, the 8 Sunshine gathered, and Lu Ye's talent tree clone sat beside Su Yuqing. The hall was quiet, and the Sunshine were all waiting. Previously, after Lu Ye's original body had left, Su Yuqing had brought his talent tree clone to gather many Rizhao and informed them of Lu Ye's plan. Therefore, all the Rizhao knew that whether Mount Fengsuan would be able to escape this time would depend on whether Lu Ye's progress was smooth or not. However, What made the sunshine a little worried was that since a few days ago, the blood clone left behind by Lu Yi suddenly became a little dull, and was not as agile as before. At this moment it seemed to be in a trance. Su Yuqing couldn't help but worry, and asked softly, "Are you okay?" After a full 3 breaths, the talent tree clone responded, "It's okay, there are too many clones, so it's difficult to take care of them." Su Yuqing didn't understand how many clones Lu Yi had to create such a strange situation. The doppelganger regained its previous agility. It looked at everyone in the sunshine and said, "Senior brothers, I'm ready to make my move. I can't predict the specific effects, but whether or not we can escape depends on this move. Senior brothers, please make your preparations." Yu Qinglu nodded and said, "Junior brother, just do your best, we will cooperate with you." As soon as the words fell, 8 figures rushed out of the hall and out of the world. The so-called cooperation was nothing more than 8 sunshine killing their way into the blood extinction world, while Lu Yi was taking action. In this way, regardless of whether Lu Yi could seize control of the blood extinction world or not, the 8 sunshine would be able to turn the world upside down. Even if there were losses, they would protect Mount Fengsuan in the south. In the hall, the talent tree clone closed its eyes. In the blood extinction world, in the underground blood river, Lu Yi and the 7 treasured blood clones exerted their strength at the same time. In an instant, the world was turned upside down. At the altar, the 6 sunshine of the blood clan changed their expressions again. Someone exclaimed, "The power of the ancestors recovering again, quickly suppress it." A few days ago there was such a thing. At that time, they were caught off guard and were caught off guard. Fortunately, under their joint efforts, the recovery power was suppressed. They didn't expect that in just a few days, the power of the ancestor would show signs of recovery. Although the 6 sunshine of the blood clan were flustered, they didn't panic. After all, they had experienced it once, and were more familiar with it this time. However, what they never expected was that the degree of recovery of the ancestors' power this time was many times more violent than the last time. In just a few breaths of time, the sunshine of the blood clan realized one thing. Even if they relied on the power of the ancestral artifact, they couldn't suppress the powerful recovery power. How could this be? The sunshine of the blood clan, who had spoken earlier, had an incredulous look on his face. As soon as his voice fell, the entire blood extinction world shook even more violently. Next to him, a sunshine exclaimed, "Mount Fengsuan is collapsing." The other sunshine of the blood clan looked in the direction of the voice, and saw unforgettable signs at a glance. Mount Fengsuan, which had stood tall in this world for tens of thousands of years, was collapsing rapidly, and large amounts of rocks rolled down. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.